William Carter walked straight past every woman on that platform. Past the pretty ones. Past the ones in fine dresses who smiled their best smiles. Past the ones Silver Creek had decided were worthy. He stopped in front of a plain-faced woman holding a single worn bag, standing alone while the crowd laughed around her. He took off his hat. He looked at her, really looked. The way a man looks when he has finally found what he came for. "You must be Clara," he said quietly. "I'd know you anywhere." The laughter died. The platform went silent. Nobody had expected that. Neither had she. Drop your city in the comments below and subscribe. You won't want to miss what these two build together. The train had been 3 days late. Clara Whitman had spent those 3 days sitting upright in a second-class car that smelled of coal smoke and other people's worry. Eating bread she'd packed herself, watching the landscape outside the window change from flat Illinois farmland to something wilder and more unforgiving. She had not slept well. She had not eaten enough. And by the time the train finally pulled into Silver Creek Station in the Montana Territory, she was tired in a way that went deeper than her body. She was tired in her spirit, but she had made a promise to herself before she ever boarded that train. She had looked at herself in the small mirror above her family's washstand. Brown hair, brown eyes, a face that nobody had ever called beautiful, and she had made a promise. Whatever they say about you when you arrive, you will not fold. She had kept harder promises than that. The moment she stepped onto the platform, she knew the rumors had arrived before her. She could feel it in the way people turned. Not with curiosity, with something sharper than that. Something she recognized from years of practice, the particular brand of attention that wasn't really attention at all, but judgment wearing attention's clothes. Two women near the station house leaned together. One of them covered her mouth with her gloved hand and said something to the other. The other one laughed, and then caught herself, and then laughed again. A group of men standing by the freight wagon went quiet when Clara walked past them. Then the quiet broke into low murmuring, and one of them, a broad-shouldered man with a red beard, shook his head slowly. The way a man shakes his head when he sees something that disappoints him. Clara kept walking. She looked for the man she was supposed to meet. She had memorized the description from his letter. Tall, dark hair going gray at the temples. Probably wearing a canvas work coat because he'd said in his last letter that he wasn't the type of man who dressed up for occasions he was nervous about. She found him at the far end of the platform, standing apart from the crowd, hat in his hands. William Carter was exactly as he described himself. Tall, weathered, a face that had spent too many years under open sky and not enough years resting. He was watching her walk toward him with an expression she couldn't quite read, not warmth exactly. Not coldness either. Something careful, measured. The expression of a man who had learned that hope was expensive, and he couldn't afford to spend it carelessly. She stopped in front of him. "Mr. Carter," she said. "Miss Whitman," he said. That was when Margaret Ellis stepped forward. Clara didn't know her name yet. She would learn it soon enough. Margaret Ellis. Wife of the bank president, self-appointed moral authority of Silver Creek. A woman who had opinions about everything and the social position to make those opinions felt. But in that moment, all Clara knew was that a woman in an expensive blue dress was pushing through the small crowd with the purposeful stride of someone who had decided she had something important to say. "You should be ashamed of yourself," Margaret said to William. Loud enough that the people on the platform stopped pretending not to listen. Sending for a woman like that. What were you thinking? William Carter? The platform went quiet. Clara felt the words hit her the way cold water hits a full-body shock. The instinct to flinch, the immediate effort to control the flinch so nobody could see it, had worked. William didn't answer right away. He looked at Margaret Ellis with an expression that was entirely unreadable, and then he looked back at Clara, and something shifted in his face. Something subtle that she couldn't name yet. "I was thinking," he said quietly, "that it was none of your business, Margaret." It was not a dramatic declaration. It was not a defense. It was just a simple statement of fact, delivered without heat, and somehow that made it more effective than shouting would have been. Margaret drew herself up. The whole town is talking. People are concerned. Then they should find something worth being concerned about, William said. He put his hat back on his head. He looked at Clara. You must be exhausted. Do you want to get your bag? Clara realized she was still holding her own bag. She had never put it down. I have it, she said. Then let's go, he said. They walked off the platform together. Not side by side exactly. There was still too much distance between them for that, but in the same direction. Away from the crowd, away from Margaret Ellis, and her expensive dress, and her certainty that she knew everything worth knowing about a woman she had never spoken to. Clara didn't look back, but she heard it. She heard the whispers following her down the street like something with teeth. Did you see her? Poor William. He must have been desperate, plain as a fence post and twice as stiff-looking. Someone should have warned him. She kept walking. She had spent 27 years learning how to keep walking. The ride to Carter Ranch took 40 minutes by wagon, and William Carter spent most of it not talking. Clara had prepared herself for awkward conversation. She had practiced questions in her head on the train, practical questions about the ranch, about his daughter, about what he needed from her in the first weeks. She had prepared herself for a man who might be too eager, or too formal, or too anything. She had not prepared herself for a man who simply said nothing and seemed completely comfortable with it. After the first 10 minutes of silence, she decided to find out if the silence was comfortable or hostile. How old is your daughter? She asked. William glanced at her. 8, he said. Her name is Ruby. Is she nervous about me coming? A pause. Probably. Are you going to warn me about something specific? Or should I just find out for myself? He looked at her again. Longer this time. She doesn't warm up to people easily. Her mother passed when she was 4. She remembers enough to miss her, and not quite enough to know exactly what she's missing. Clara nodded slowly. That's a hard age for that kind of loss. Yes, he said. And then after a moment, she's not unkind. She's just cautious. That's reasonable, Clara said. William seemed to consider that. He turned back to the road. After another long pause, he said, You're not what I expected. Clara waited. I don't mean that as an insult, he added. What did you expect? He was quiet for so long she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, someone who needed me to make her feel better about being here. Clara thought about that. I don't need you to make me feel better about anything, she said. I need us to figure out whether we can build something that works. Those are different things. William didn't respond. But something in his posture shifted barely perceptible. The kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't paying attention, and Clara filed it away. She paid attention to everything. That had always been her particular gift. Not beauty, not charm, not the kind of effortless social grace her younger sisters moved through the world with. But attention, the quiet, steady, relentless kind that noticed what other people missed, because they were too busy performing their own impressions of competence to actually observe anything. She started observing Carter Ranch long before they arrived. She saw it in how William held the reins competently, but with a kind of automatic fatigue, like a man doing something he'd done 10,000 times without it ever becoming easier. She saw it in the way the wagon wheels hit the ruts in the road, and the road itself told her things unmaintained. Used frequently, nobody had graded it recently. She saw it in the fence line they passed at the edge of the property, and the way the posts were spaced, and the way 2 of them had given up entirely and simply leaned against each other for support. The ranch was struggling. She had known that from his letter. He hadn't hidden it. He'd written plainly, the ranch needs work. I need someone capable, not someone decorative. If that is the kind of arrangement you can accept, write back. She had written back because she recognized honesty when she found it. And honesty was rarer than it should have been. But knowing something from a letter and seeing it in front of you were different things. Carter Ranch had good bones. She could see that too. The land was solid. The main house was small but structurally sound. The barn was large enough to be useful. The cattle she could see from the road were thin, but not broken. This was not a ranch that had failed. It was a ranch that had been slowly losing a fight it hadn't figured out how to win yet. Clara had seen that before. She'd seen it in her own family's farm back in Illinois. Year after year, the slow leak of resources and confidence and hope. Everyone working hard enough to stay in place, but not hard enough, or not smart enough, or not organized enough to actually move forward. She had fixed that too, quietly, without anyone noticing, and certainly without anyone thanking her. She could fix this. Ruby Carter was waiting on the porch when the wagon pulled up. She was small for 8, with her father's dark hair and what Clara suspected had been her mother's eyes wide and watchful. The color of winter sky before a storm comes. She had her arms crossed over her chest and her chin lifted at an angle that announced very clearly, "I have decided not to like you yet." Clara climbed down from the wagon without waiting for help. She walked to the base of the porch steps and stopped. She looked up at Ruby, and Ruby looked down at her. And neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Clara said, "You must be Ruby." "Yes," Ruby said, not unfriendly. Just factual. She was going to give nothing away for free. "I'm Clara. I know who you are." "Then I don't have to introduce myself," Clara said. "That saves time." Ruby's chin lowered by exactly half an inch. Her arms stayed crossed. "Papa says you're going to stay here." "That's the plan," Clara agreed. "He says you're going to help with things. I'm going to try." Ruby was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The last woman who came to help left after 4 days." "What happened?" Clara asked. Ruby shrugged one shoulder. She said it was too much work. "It probably was," Clara said. For her, Ruby looked at her carefully, reassessing. Clara could see. Running some internal calculation. "You think you can handle it?" "I don't know yet," Clara said honestly. "But I'm not planning to leave in 4 days to find out." The arms uncrossed. "Just slightly, just enough." "Dinner's going to be late," Ruby announced. "Hattie burned the beans again." "Who's Hattie?" "The woman who cooks. She's very old and she burns things a lot." Ruby paused. "Papa keeps her on because she doesn't have anywhere else to go." Clara nodded. "Let me wash up and I'll help." She climbed the porch steps, and Ruby stepped aside to let her pass. And Clara felt the small girl watching her back as she walked through the front door. She didn't say anything about it. She just went to find the kitchen. The kitchen was a small disaster. Not a catastrophic one, nothing irreparable, but the kind of slow, accumulated disorder that happens when nobody has the time or energy to address the small problems before they compound into medium ones. The shelves were organized by whoever had put things away last and not by any system that prioritized logic. The pantry inventory was a mystery. There was a pot on the stove with what had, at some point in its history, been beans and was now something considerably less optimistic. Hattie was a compact woman in her 70s with sharp eyes and the slightly defensive posture of someone who expected to be criticized. She looked at Clara, the way Clara was beginning to recognize. People looked at her, the quick assessment. The subtle dismissal, the slight surprise when the dismissal didn't fully land. "I'm Clara," Clara said. "Can I help?" "I've been running this kitchen for 6 months," Hattie said. Not aggressive, just informational, establishing territory. "And it sounds like you've been doing it alone," Clara said. 6 months is a long time to run a kitchen by yourself. Hattie blinked. "It is," she said after a moment. Less defensive now. "Tell me what we have," Clara said. "Let's figure out what we can make." They made something. It wasn't elegant, but it was edible, and it was warm. And when Clara brought it to the table, William ate it without comment, and Ruby ate it without complaint. And Hattie sat in the corner looking at Clara with an expression that had moved somewhere between cautious respect and wary curiosity. After dinner, William pushed back from the table and looked at Clara with that same careful, measured expression he'd worn on the platform. "I want to show you the ranch ledgers tomorrow," he said. "If you're willing." "I'd like that," she said. "You kept accounts before?" "My family's farm," she said. "For 7 years," he nodded slowly. "I should warn you. The numbers are not good." "Numbers are just information," Clara said. "Even bad ones tell you something useful." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "All right. Tomorrow morning then." He went to bed. Ruby helped clear the table without being asked, and she didn't speak to Clara again that night. But when she passed her in the narrow hallway on the way to her room, she slowed down just slightly, and Clara heard her say, very quietly, "The beans were better tonight." It wasn't much, but it was something. The next morning, Clara was up before anyone else. She had always been that kind of person, someone for whom sleep was a practical necessity rather than a pleasure, who woke with a list already forming in her mind before her feet hit the floor. Back in Illinois, she had used those early hours to do the things nobody else remembered needed doing. Checking the inventory, reviewing the week's expenses, writing letters that had to be written but that everyone else kept putting off. Here in the gray half-light before sunrise, she used them to walk the ranch. Not to be seen doing it, not to perform diligence, just to understand what she'd gotten herself into. What she found was exactly what she'd suspected from the road. And worse, the fencing situation was more serious than 2 leaning posts. There were 3 separate sections along the eastern boundary where cattle could have walked out if they'd been determined enough. The water trough situation near the main barn was inefficient water spilling where it shouldn't, pooling where animals didn't drink, which meant waste and also mud that cattle were tracking back into areas they shouldn't be tracking mud. The feed storage was organized for convenience, not for quality preservation, which meant the grain at the bottom of one of the bins had probably been compromised for weeks. She made a mental list. She organized the list by urgency. She thought about what could be addressed immediately with the resources already on hand, and what would require expense, and what could wait. She was standing by the far fence line, looking at one of the broken posts, when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned. A man she hadn't met yet was walking toward her. He was in his 40s, lean and weathered, with the particular kind of ease in his movement that came from decades of ranch work. He stopped about 10 feet away and looked at her with frank curiosity. "You're the new Mrs.," he said. "I'm Clara Whitman," she said. "I'm not the Mrs. yet. We haven't been married," he blinked. "Right, sorry. I'm Hector Reyes. I work the cattle with Pete and the Morrison boy." He paused. "Was wondering what you were doing out here." "Looking at this fence line," she said. He looked at the fence. "Yeah, it's been on the list." "How long has it been on the list?" He scratched the back of his neck. "Going on 3 months, I think." "What's kept it from getting fixed?" "William Mr. Carter, he's been focused on the cattle, trying to figure out the weight gain problem." "What weight gain problem?" she asked. Hector seemed surprised that she'd asked a follow-up question. Most women who came through Carter Ranch, in his experience, asked about curtains and cookware. "The cattle aren't gaining weight the way they should," he said. "William thinks it might be the pasture rotation, or the water, or maybe the feed. He's been going back and forth on it." "Has anyone checked the mineral content of the water?" Clara asked. Hector stared at her. "The what?" "The mineral content. If the water's too high in certain minerals, it can affect how cattle absorb nutrients." "I've seen it before. If that's the issue, rotating the pasture won't fix it." Hector was very quiet for a moment. "Where'd you learn that?" he said. "My father's farm had the same problem for 2 years," she said. "We kept thinking it was something we were doing wrong with the feed. It turned out to be the water source." Another long pause. Then Hector said slowly, "William's been losing sleep over this for 6 months." "I know," she said. "I'd like to help him figure it out." Hector looked at her with a new kind of attention, not the dismissive once-over from the platform crowd. Not even the cautious assessment from Ruby. Something more like the way a man looks when he realizes he might have underestimated something. "I'll fix the fence line," he said. "Today." "Thank you," Clara said. He nodded. He walked back toward the barn. 3 steps away, he stopped and turned around. "For what it's worth," he said. I didn't laugh. At the station, I wasn't in that crowd. Clara looked at him. "I know," she said. "I noticed." He seemed surprised by that. He nodded again and kept walking. Clara turned back to the fence line. The morning light was coming up properly now, painting the Montana landscape in the honest, unforgiving clarity that only early light could manage. She had things to do. She got to work. The ledger meeting happened at the kitchen table after breakfast, with Ruby at school, and Hattie doing something in the back of the house that probably involved avoiding the conversation she knew was happening. William laid the books in front of Clara without preamble. She opened the first one and started reading. She didn't say anything for a long time. She just read. She turned pages carefully. She made small marks in the margin of the notebook. She'd brought her own notebook, the one she'd kept accounts in back in Illinois, still half full of old numbers that told the story of her family's farm in columns and rows. William sat across from her and drank his coffee and waited. He looked like a man who was used to waiting for bad news and had developed a kind of grim patience about it. After 40 minutes, Clara looked up. "Your cattle revenue should be about 40% higher than it is," she said. William set down his coffee cup. "I know. Your feed costs are running about 15% more than they should be for a herd this size. I know that too. Your labor costs are actually reasonable." "That's not the problem." He nodded. "What is the problem?" "Several things," she said. "But the biggest one is that you're selling at the wrong time. You're selling when you need cash, not when the market is best. That means you're consistently getting prices that are 10 to 20% below what you could be getting if you had a small operating reserve that let you wait." He was quiet for a moment. "I don't have a reserve." "No," she agreed, "you don't. Because every time you're close to building one, something breaks and you have to spend it." She looked down at the ledger. The fence repairs, the barn roof, the water system near the east pasture, all the things that kept needing to be done. Things that needed to be done before they became emergencies, she said. When they become emergencies, they cost twice as much. She paused. "I'm not criticizing you, I'm telling you what I see." William looked at his hands. He had large hands, scarred from years of work, and he looked at them the way a man looks at something that has served him well but is starting to show the miles. "My wife used to say, I was good at working hard and poor at working smart," he said. Clara waited. "She wasn't wrong," he added. "Eleanor was never wrong about things like that." "She sounds like she was perceptive," Clara said carefully. "She was," he said. He looked up. "She also would have told me this, what you just told me years ago, if I'd listened better." He paused. "I'm not particularly good at listening." "You're listening now," Clara said. He looked at her. Something crossed his face, not quite surprise, not quite gratitude, something between the two that didn't have an easy name. "So what do I do?" he asked. "First thing," she said, "is we figure out the water." He frowned. "The water? I spoke to Hector this morning. I think your cattle's weight problem might be related to the mineral content of your water source. It's worth testing before you try anything else." William stared at her. "That's where did you my family's farm," she said. "We had the same issue. Took us 2 years to figure out." She met his eyes steadily. "I don't want it to take you 2 years." He was very still for a moment. She could see him processing, not just the information, but the fact of her. The reality that the woman everyone had laughed at on the platform yesterday was sitting at his kitchen table, having a conversation that nobody else in Silver Creek could have had with him. "All right," he said finally, "the water." And then she said, "We work on the selling schedule. And then the feed system. One thing at a time. You make it sound manageable," he said. Not accusing, just noting. "Most things are," Clara said, "if you break them down far enough." He picked up his coffee cup. He looked at her across the table with that careful, measured expression, but this time the measurement had shifted. She could see it. Whatever he'd been measuring her against, the number was changing. He didn't say anything else. But he didn't need to. 2 weeks passed. In those 2 weeks, a lot happened. The water was tested. Clara had found a description of the process in an agricultural almanac she'd brought with her from Illinois. One of 7 books that had taken up most of the weight in her single worn bag. The results confirmed what she'd suspected. The mineral levels in the creek that fed the eastern pasture were elevated. They rerouted the cattle to the western water source while they worked on filtering the eastern one. And within 10 days, the cattle that had been grazing the eastern pasture were showing improved energy. Hector noticed it first. He came to the house one evening, hat in his hand, with the expression of a man who had something to say and was working up to saying it. William was in the barn. Hattie pointed him toward the kitchen, where Clara was doing the accounts. "The Morrison boy and Pete are saying the same thing I'm saying," he said. Without preamble, "The cattle on the east side are doing better." "Yes," Clara said. She didn't make it a bigger deal than it was. "William know? I told him yesterday. He's keeping an eye on it." Hector nodded. He turned his hat in his hands. "I've been on this ranch for 4 years," he said. "That water thing, none of us thought to check it. None of us." "It's not obvious," Clara said. "It took our farm 2 years to figure it out." "Still," he said. He looked at her. "I just wanted to say the way people treated you at the station. At the market yesterday." He paused. "It's not right." Clara set down her pen. She looked at him carefully. "What happened at the market?" He hesitated. "Margaret Ellis was there. She was talking about you. Loud enough that it wasn't an accident." Clara had been at the market the previous afternoon, getting supplies. She had felt the temperature in the room change when she walked in. She'd heard the edge in certain conversations. She'd noticed the way 2 women near the fabric bolts had moved slightly away from her when she approached. She hadn't said anything to William because she didn't want him to feel responsible for it. "What was she saying?" Clara asked. Hector looked uncomfortable. "That you'd come out here because you couldn't get anyone back home to take you. That William had settled. That it was sad, really." He paused. "That's the polite version." Clara picked up her pen again. She looked at the numbers in front of her. "People have been talking about me my entire life," she said. "They said I was too ordinary to matter, too plain to marry, too quiet to lead." She wrote a number in the column. "I've been proving them wrong since I was 16 years old. I'm not going to stop now." Hector was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Is there anything we can do?" "You're already doing it," she said. "You fixed the fence line the morning I asked. You helped me get water samples. You came here tonight to tell me something you thought I should know." She looked up. "That's doing something." He nodded. He put his hat back on. "Good night, Miss Clara," he said. "Good night, Hector." He left. She sat with the accounts for another hour. She wrote careful numbers in careful columns. And she thought about Margaret Ellis. And she thought about the market. And she thought about her mother's voice on the day she'd turned 25. Saying, "Clara, some women are meant for certain things. You should be grateful for what you have." She had been grateful. She had also kept working. The moment that changed everything between her and William happened on a Tuesday night in the 3rd week, and neither of them planned it. Ruby had been sick, nothing serious. Just the kind of cold that knocked children flat for a few days, and Clara had spent 2 nights sitting up with her, giving her broth and cool cloths, and reading to her from a book of stories Clara had brought from Illinois. Ruby had not asked for Clara specifically. She hadn't asked for anyone. She'd just been sick and small and miserable in her bed. And Clara had been the one who happened to come to check on her and hadn't left. On the 3rd night, Ruby was better enough to sleep properly. Clara came downstairs to find William still awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold in front of him. "She's sleeping," Clara said. He exhaled. Good. He looked at her in the way he sometimes did when he thought she wasn't paying full attention. You should sleep too. You've been up 2 nights. I'll sleep when I know she's all the way through it, Clara said. She sat down across from him. They sat together in the quiet kitchen with the lamp burning low and the Montana night pressing against the windows. Cold and absolute. After a while, William said, "She likes you." Clara looked up. "She's been tolerating me." "For Ruby, that's the same thing," he said. And something in his voice, something tired and honest and stripped of its usual careful management, made Clara understand what he meant. This child had been alone in her grief, not unloved. Never unloved. But unable to trust, unable to let anyone close enough to matter, because the person who had mattered most had left without warning, and the wound had never properly closed. "She asked me last night," Clara said quietly, "if you were lonely." William was very still. "She said she thought you were lonely, but that you never said so because you didn't want her to feel like she wasn't enough." Clara looked at him. "I told her you were someone who was used to carrying things by himself. That it didn't mean she wasn't enough. That some people just carry things alone because they've always had to." The kitchen was completely quiet. "What did she say?" William asked. "She said that sounded like you." Clara paused. "Then she asked me if I was lonely." "What did you tell her?" Clara thought about it. "I told her I was used to being overlooked," she said. "That being overlooked and being alone aren't quite the same thing. But they feel similar enough that you stop expecting it to change." William set down his teacup. He looked at her with an expression she had never seen from him before, unguarded. The careful management entirely gone, just a man looking at a woman across a kitchen table in the middle of the night, and seeing her. "You were overlooked your whole life," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," she said simply. "By most people." She met his eyes. "I'm not looking for sympathy. I'm just answering Ruby's question honestly. You're not used to people seeing you," he said. No, he was quiet for a long time. The lamp flickered. Outside, the wind moved through the Montana dark. "I see you," he said. 3 words, quietly spoken. Not romantic, not yet. Not in that way, but something more fundamental. A simple declaration of fact. Something that Clara, who had spent 27 years learning to function without this particular thing, was completely unprepared for. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "Don't say that unless you mean it." "I mean it," he said. She looked at him. She looked at this tired, careful man who had built walls around his hope because he couldn't afford to have it broken again. This man whose daughter had asked a stranger if her father was lonely. This man who ran a struggling ranch with the stubborn, exhausted determination of someone who had never found a better option than keeping going. She believed him. She wasn't sure what to do with that yet. But she believed him. Silver Creek's opinion of Clara Whitman did not shift easily. Small towns rarely change their minds in a hurry. They're more comfortable revising, gradually moving from open contempt to quiet skepticism to grudging acknowledgement. Each step so slow that nobody has to admit they were wrong at any particular moment. Clara understood this. She had grown up in a small town. She didn't try to change minds. She wasn't built for that kind of effort, the deliberate campaign, the strategic charm offensive, the slow performance of worthiness. She had watched her sisters do it, had watched them smile and soften and arrange themselves into shapes that other people found pleasing. And she had recognized early that she didn't have the talent for it. What she had was competence. And competence, she had learned, was quieter than charm, but louder in the long run. It started with small things. Martin Webb, who ran the general store, had a bookkeeping problem he'd been struggling with for months, a discrepancy between his inventory records and his actual stock that he couldn't account for. Clara happened to be in the stores one afternoon when he was frustrated about it. And she offered to look at it, and she found the error in 20 minutes. It was a simple mistake in how his supplier invoices were being recorded, compounded over 6 months into something that looked much worse than it was. Martin Webb didn't say thank you. He said, in a way that meant thank you but wasn't ready to admit it. But the next time Clara came into the store, he gave her the good selection of fabric instead of the remnants he usually offered to ranchers' wives. Then there was the situation with the Morrison family, whose eldest son, the same Morrison boy who worked Carter Ranch, had been trying to understand a loan agreement his father had signed with the bank. The language was dense, and the terms were confusing, and the family was worried they'd agreed to something they hadn't fully understood. Clara read the document. She explained the terms clearly. She identified two clauses that were more favorable to the Morrisons than they'd realized. The elder Morrison shook her hand with both of his and called her an extraordinary woman. She didn't need his admiration. But she noted that it traveled. These things moved through a small town, like water, through soil slowly. Invisibly, but persistently. But none of it changed Margaret Ellis. Margaret Ellis was a particular kind of immovable. She had decided what Clara was, and she had told enough people, and now she had a social investment in being right. To change her opinion would be to admit she'd been wrong in public, and Margaret Ellis was not built for public wrongness. So when Clara walked past the Ellis house on her way to the market, she heard Margaret's voice from the porch, still trying to make herself useful. "I see," and Margaret's companion, whoever it was that week, laughed. Clara kept walking. She kept walking because she had learned something important in 27 years. The opinion of someone who had already decided to dismiss you was not information. It was noise, and she had learned to let noise pass through her without holding it. But that night, alone in her room, the small room at the end of the hall that was hers, for the first time in her life, her own space, her own window, looking out on the Montana dark, she sat on the edge of her bed and felt the weight of it. Not the cruelty specifically, the accumulated weight of all the cruelties, all the small and large dismissals, all the years of being overlooked and underestimated and told, in 100 different ways, that she was not quite enough. She sat with that weight, and then she stood up. She picked up her notebook. She opened it to the page where she kept the list of things that needed doing on Carter Ranch. She added 3 items. She went to sleep. Tomorrow was going to be a long day, and she had work to do. The first time Thomas Blackwell came to Carter Ranch, he arrived unannounced. That told Clara everything she needed to know about him. A man who announced himself was a man who respected the people he was visiting. A man who simply appeared at your gate on a Wednesday morning, sitting high on an expensive horse, wearing clothes that cost more than most families in Silver Creek, spent in a month that man had already decided that the people inside didn't require the courtesy of warning. Clara was in the yard when he rode up, going through the week's supply inventory with Hattie. She looked up at the sound of hooves and saw him clearly before he saw her, which was an advantage she filed away immediately. He was perhaps 50, broad across the shoulders, with the particular kind of confidence that came not from earning something, but from never having been told no. His face was pleasant enough at a distance. It was only when he got closer that you noticed the way his eyes moved, quick and assessing. The kind of eyes that were always calculating value. He looked at Clara the way he might look at a piece of furniture he hadn't ordered. Briefly, then passed her toward the barn. "Carter here," he said. Not is Mr. Carter available. Not even William, just Carter. As if the man's name were a shorthand for something owed. "He's in the north pasture," Clara said. "Is there something I can help you with?" Blackwell looked at her properly for the first time. She could see the moment he placed her the new woman. The mail-order bride, the one everyone at the station had laughed about. His expression didn't change exactly, but something shifted behind his eyes. "No," he said pleasantly. "I'll wait." He didn't get off his horse. Clara went back to her inventory. She was aware of him watching her as she worked. And she was aware that he wanted her to feel the weight of being watched and become uncomfortable. She had been watched critically her entire life. She had developed a particular skill for letting observation run off her like rain off oilcloth. She kept counting, she kept writing. After about 10 minutes, William came around the side of the barn, still pulling on his work gloves, and his face when he saw Blackwell did something careful and controlled that Clara noticed immediately. Not fear, not quite, but something adjacent to it, the expression of a man who had been hoping for more time before this particular problem arrived. "Thomas," he said, "William." Blackwell finally dismounted. He shook William's hand with the ease of a man who had never needed to calculate whether he could afford the gesture. "Thought I'd come by, check in on things." His eyes moved to Clara. "See the changes." "This is Clara," William said. "She's been helping with the operation, I heard," Blackwell said. He smiled at Clara, a full, practiced smile that reached his eyes just far enough to seem genuine. "Word travels fast in Silver Creek. You've been making an impression." "I've been working," Clara said. "Sometimes people notice." Something flickered in Blackwell's expression. Not offense men like him, rarely felt genuine offense from women like her. Something more like recalibration, a slight adjustment to his original estimate. "Walk with me, William," he said. It wasn't quite a request. William glanced at Clara. She gave him nothing, no signal. No suggestion. That was his decision to make. He walked with Blackwell. Clara watched them go. She watched the way Blackwell kept his hand near William's shoulder without quite touching it, close enough to suggest familiarity, close enough to suggest the particular kind of ownership that came wrapped in friendliness. She had seen that kind of friendliness before. It always wanted something. She went back to her inventory, but she was listening. She was always listening. William didn't say anything about the conversation that afternoon. But at dinner he was quieter than usual, and the quiet had a different texture than his normal quiet. Not the comfortable silence of a man at peace, but the charged stillness of a man turning something over in his mind, and not liking what he found each time it came back around. Ruby felt it too. Children always felt it. She ate her dinner without her usual commentary, and watched her father from under her lashes with an 8-year-old's worried attention. Clara waited until Ruby was in bed. She came back to the kitchen to find William still at the table, a cup of coffee in front of him that he wasn't drinking. She sat down. She didn't ask him anything. She just sat. After a while he said, "He wants the Eastern Quarter." Clara had suspected something like this. She didn't say so. "What did he offer?" William named a number. She kept her face neutral, but her mind was already moving. The Eastern Quarter was the section with the creek access. It was also, she had realized within her first week, the most strategically valuable part of the Carter land. Without it, the ranch's water access became complicated. With it, Blackwell's property would effectively surround 3 sides of the Carter operation. "What did you tell him?" she asked. "I told him I'd think about it." "And will you?" He looked at her. "I don't want to sell." "Then don't, it's not that simple." He turned the coffee cup between his hands. "He holds the note on the Morrison family's land. He's got interest in the bank. He's been buying up property on the eastern edge of the territory for 2 years. He paused. "Men like Thomas Blackwell, when they want something, they find ways to get it. The question is whether it's easier to let them have it or harder." Clara considered that. "What does he want the Eastern Quarter for?" William frowned. He said something about expanding his grazing range. "No," Clara said. William looked at her. "The Eastern Quarter doesn't have enough quality grazing to justify what he offered you," she said. "If he wanted grazing land, there are 3 other parcels available in the county that would serve him better and cost him less." She paused. "He wants your water access. He wants to control who can reach the creek from the south." William was very still. "If he controls your water," Clara continued, "he controls your ability to maintain the eastern pasture. Which means gradually he controls whether this ranch continues to operate." She looked at him directly. "He's not buying a quarter of your land. He's buying the ability to decide your future." The silence that followed was the kind that had weight. William set down the coffee cup. He stared at the table. His jaw worked once, the way it did when he was processing something he didn't want to be true. He said it was a generous offer, William said quietly. It is a generous offer, Clara said. That's what makes it dangerous. It's generous enough to be tempting. Not generous enough to be fair. He looked at her with something that was equal parts gratitude and dread. The gratitude was for the clarity. The dread was for what the clarity meant, that there was a harder road ahead than the one he'd hoped for. If I tell him no, he said, he'll find another way, Clara finished. Yes, he probably will, she folded her hands on the table. But he'll find another way whether you sell or not. The only difference is whether you start that fight with your water access or without it. William rubbed his face with both hands, a gesture she had come to recognize as his version of admitting that something was difficult. I don't have the resources to fight Thomas Blackwell, he said. Not legally. Not financially, not yet, Clara said. He looked at her through his fingers. You have a plan, he said. It wasn't quite a question. I have the beginning of a plan, she said. I need to understand the land records first, and the original deed on your property, and any prior agreements your father made with anyone in the county. William lowered his hands. My father's papers are in the chest in the study. Nobody's touched them in years. I'd like to look through them, she said. If that's all right. He studied her face for a long moment. She could see the internal negotiation, the part of him that had spent years managing everything alone. The part that had learned the hard way that trusting people with important things was expensive. Wrestling with the part that had watched her work for 3 weeks and was running out of reasons not to trust her. All right, he said. Good, she said. She stood. One more thing. What? Don't tell Blackwell anything yet. Don't tell him yes and no, just let it sit. William nodded slowly. And don't let him come onto this property again without someone from the ranch present, she said. Not because you're afraid of him. Because men who drop by unannounced to friendly ranches aren't being friendly. They're gathering information. William looked at her with that expression again, the one she still didn't quite have a name for. The one that had been appearing on his face more frequently in the past 2 weeks. Not admiration exactly. Something quieter than that. Something that sat in the space between I didn't expect this and I don't know what to do with this. Good night, Clara, he said. Good night, William, she said. She went to the study to find a lamp. She had papers to read. Your father's documents were never as organized as his confidence implied. Clara had known men like James Carter, she'd never met him. He'd been dead 4 years, but she knew him from the quality of his records men, who trusted their own memory over written documentation and paid for it, eventually. He had kept some things. Receipts for major purchases, a few letters from county officials, the original deed on the Carter land. That deed was what she was looking for. She found it at the bottom of the chest, wrapped in oilcloth that had kept it in better shape than the papers around it. She unfolded it carefully and brought it to the lamp. She read it once quickly. Then she read it again slowly. Then she sat back and let out a breath. She had found something. It was a notation in the corner of the deed, a small, precise notation that James Carter had written in his cramped handwriting, referencing a water rights agreement dated 6 years before William had taken over the ranch. The agreement itself wasn't in the chest, but the notation referenced a specific document held at the county recorder's office in Millbridge, 30 miles east. She didn't know yet what the water rights agreement said. She didn't know if it helped or complicated things. But she knew that Blackwell's offer had been made without mentioning it. And a man who was doing business, honestly, would have mentioned it. She wrote down everything she needed to verify. She checked the time past midnight. She rolled up the deed carefully and returned it to the chest exactly as she'd found it. She did not sleep for another hour. When she finally did, her mind was already in Millbridge, at the county recorder's office, reading a document that might change everything. She told William the next morning. He listened without interrupting, which she had come to appreciate about him. He was not a man who filled silences with his own voice. He let you finish your thought before he had his. When she was done, he said, "You think Blackwell knows about the water rights agreement. I think he knows more about your land than you do," she said. "Yes, and if the agreement favors us, then his offer makes even less sense than it already did," Clara said. "Which means he was hoping you'd sign something away without ever knowing you had protection." William's jaw tightened. "I need to go to Millbridge. We both need to go to Millbridge," Clara said. He looked at her. "You don't have to. I know the legal language to look for," she said. "I've spent the last 3 weeks reading agricultural agreements in Montana Territory." "You haven't." She said it without apology. "Also, you need someone who won't let you accept a simple summary when the full document might say something more complicated." A pause. Then, reluctantly, "Fair enough. I'll arrange for Hattie to manage Ruby for 2 days," she said. "We can leave Thursday morning." He nodded. "Thursday," he agreed. He started to leave the kitchen. At the doorway he stopped, his hand on the frame, and turned back. "Clara," he said. "Yes?" "When you found that notation last night, were you frightened?" Of what it might mean. She thought about it, honestly. "No," she said. "I was relieved." He frowned. "Relieved? Because it meant we had something to look for," she said. "A problem you can define is always better than one you can't." He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, very quietly, "My wife used to say something like that." He walked out before she could respond. She stayed at the kitchen table for a moment, her hands flat on the wood, thinking about a woman she had never met, who had apparently understood something important about how to move through a world that was frequently difficult. She thought Eleanor Carter would have been someone worth knowing. The ride to Millbridge was 6 hours by wagon, which meant conversation was either inevitable or they had to perform an extended and increasingly uncomfortable silence. They talked. Not about the ranch at first. Not about Blackwell. They talked about smaller things, the kind of conversation that happens when two people are in close proximities for long enough that formality becomes too exhausting to maintain. William talked about his father without being asked. He talked about the particular difficulty of inheriting a legacy you admired without fully understanding, of spending years trying to live up to a dead man's idea of the ranch without knowing if that idea still fit the current reality. Clara talked about her mother, about the particular cruelty of being overlooked by the person who should have seen you most clearly, and the complicated grief of loving someone who never quite managed to look at you properly. They didn't make it into comfort. Neither of them was built for that kind of easy emotional exchange. But they made it into honest conversation, the kind where you say the true thing and let the other person hold it without requiring them to fix it. Clara found herself doing something she hadn't done in years. She found herself talking without measuring every word first. About 3 hours into the journey, William said, "You could have married someone in Illinois." She considered the statement. "Probably. Why didn't you?" She thought about how to answer that. "I had a few opportunities," she said. "Men who were looking for someone practical. Reliable." She paused. "That sounds like a compliment. And sometimes it is. But there's a version of it that means they wanted a housekeeper with a wedding ring." William was quiet. "I wanted something real," she said. "I didn't know what that looked like." "Exactly, but I knew what it didn't look like." She glanced at him. "Your letter was different." "Different how?" "Honest," she said. "You said exactly what you had. You didn't exaggerate. You didn't promise anything you couldn't deliver. You said the ranch was struggling, and you needed someone capable, and you'd treat her with respect." She paused. "Most men promise wonderful things because they're trying to win you. You were just telling me the truth and letting me decide." He kept his eyes on the road. "I wasn't sure anyone would respond to that. Someone like me would," she said. The wagon moved through the morning, and neither of them said anything for a while. But the silence was different now. Lighter. The kind of silence that meant both people had said enough, that the quiet no longer needed to be filled. 2 hours out from Millbridge," William said. Do you think the agreement will help us? I think it will tell us exactly where we stand, she said. Which is what we need before we decide what to do next. And if it doesn't help, then we find another angle, she said simply. He glanced at her. You're not afraid of him. I'm not afraid of what he represents, she said. Greedy men who buy influence and expect everyone smaller than them to step aside. She looked at the road. I've met versions of Thomas Blackwell before. They count on people being too tired or too isolated or too unsure of themselves to push back. She paused. I'm none of those things. William said nothing for a moment. Then no, he said quietly. You're not. The county recorder's office in Millbridge smelled of old paper and disuse. The particular scent of documents that held their secrets patiently because they'd been holding them for years. The recorder himself was a nervous little man named Aldous Finch, who looked at Clara with the reflexive skepticism of someone who had spent his career dealing with men and had not updated his expectations to include women who arrived with specific document reference numbers and a list of precise questions. Clara gave him the reference number from James Carter's notation. He went to find the file. He was gone for 11 minutes. Clara counted. When he came back, he was carrying a folder that was thicker than she'd expected. And his expression had shifted from skeptical to something more careful. You're asking about the Carter water rights agreement, he said. I am, Clara said. May I ask in what capacity? I manage the accounts and records for Carter Ranch, she said, Moat. This is William Carter. She gestured to William, who nodded. We're reviewing the property documentation. Finch looked at William. William looked back with an expression that said she speaks for us on this matter without using any words. Finch laid the folder on the counter. Clara opened it. She read it the way she read everything important carefully, thoroughly, looking for the particular phrases that mattered, and the particular phrases that were designed to look like they mattered while actually saying nothing. Halfway through the second page, she stopped. She read a paragraph again. Then she said very quietly, William. He was beside her in 2 steps. She pointed to the paragraph without touching the document. He read it. She watched his face as he did. She watched him understand what it said. The water rights agreement, executed between James Carter and the county in the year of the original land settlement, granted Carter Ranch permanent and exclusive rights to the creek water source for the eastern boundary. Not just access, rights, the kind that couldn't be bought, sold, or transferred without the explicit agreement of the Carter family. Blackwell couldn't take the water, he never could have. He'd been making his offer on land that, if Clara hadn't looked in that chest on a midnight that William didn't know about, would have been signed away by a man who had no idea he was giving up the one thing that made the sale meaningless. William straightened slowly. He knew, William said. His voice was very controlled. He's known about this document for longer than we have, Clara said. Probably since before he made the offer. The controlled expression cracked. Just slightly, just enough. He sat in my yard. He shook my hand. He called himself a neighbor. He stopped. He was going to let me sign away land he already knew he couldn't legally control the water rights on. Yes, Clara said. Why, what does he gain? Separation, she said. If you sell him the eastern quarter without the water rights, the parcel becomes less valuable than he paid for it. But your operation becomes more complicated. The eastern pasture is harder to manage without that quarter as a buffer. He's not trying to steal your water. He's trying to complicate your operation enough that you struggle. And when you struggle, he comes back with another offer. Then another one. She looked at him steadily. He's patient. He's been buying properties on the eastern edge of the territory for 2 years. He's building towards something specific, and Carter Ranch is in the way. William looked at the document. He looked at Clara. He thought I didn't know any of this, he said. He thought neither of us did, she said. He thought I was the woman from the train platform. The one everyone laughed at. She held his gaze. He was wrong. The silence in the recorder's office was absolute. Aldous Finch, who had been pretending to organize something on the opposite shelf during this entire exchange, cleared his throat quietly. "Shall I make you certified copies of that agreement?" he said. "It's within your rights to request them." "Yes," Clara said. "Please," and Finch added, more carefully, "I would suggest not as legal counsel. Simply as someone who has seen these situations before, that you might want to file a formal notice of existing rights with the county. A document that officially establishes the Carter family's claim on record, so that there is no ambiguity should anyone attempt to challenge it in the future." Clara looked at him. He met her eyes with the expression of a man who had seen Thomas Blackwell's name on documents before and had opinions about it that his professional position didn't allow him to express directly. "How long would that take?" she asked. "I could have it prepared before you leave today," he said. "Then let's do that," she said. She glanced at William. He nodded once. Finch disappeared back into his files with the air of a man who was quietly pleased to be useful. William stood beside Clara at the counter. They stood close enough that she could feel the tension still moving through him, not collapsing, but reorganizing. The particular way a person's anger moves when it finds a productive channel. "I owe you something," he said quietly. "You don't," she said. "You owe me nothing," she said. "We're building something here. You and me and Ruby and Hector and the rest of them. That's what we're doing." She looked at the folder on the counter. "Protecting it isn't a favor, it's the job." He was quiet for a moment. "You really don't need anyone to make you feel better about being here," he said. It was almost word for word what he'd said to her on the wagon from the station 3 weeks ago. She recognized it. She looked at him. "No," she said, "I don't. But I'm glad you're here," he said. "Not because the ranch needs you, because he's stopped." He seemed to be working out how to say something that didn't come easily. "Because I was doing this alone and I didn't know how much that was costing me until it wasn't true anymore." Clara was quiet. She thought about 27 years of keeping accounts that nobody praised, of fixing problems that nobody noticed, of being the woman who made everything work and was rewarded with being overlooked in the very places she'd kept alive. She thought about a man on a train platform, holding his hat in his hands, who hadn't defended her with speeches or declarations, but with 3 quiet words. "It's none of your business, Margaret." She thought about a small girl with winter sky eyes who had said, without entirely meaning to, that her father was lonely. "I'm glad I'm here too," she said, and she meant it in a way she hadn't meant anything in a very long time. They rode back to Silver Creek with the certified documents in Clara's bag, wrapped in oilcloth the way the original deed had been. The sun was going down when they reached the edge of Carter land. The western light came in low and golden and turned everything it touched into something that looked like it had been made to last. William slowed the wagon at the gate. He looked out over the property in the particular way she had seen him look at it before, not with the exhausted practicality of daily ownership, but with something older and quieter. The look of a man seeing something he'd almost lost. "When we get back," he said, "I want to write a formal response to Blackwell's offer." "Declining it," Clara said. "Declining it," he confirmed, "and informing him that we've filed notice of the existing water rights with the county." She almost smiled. "He'll know we found the document." "Yes," William said. He won't be pleased." "No," William agreed. "He won't be." He clicked the horses forward. "But he'll know that we know. And that changes what kind of problem we are for him." Clara looked at the land as they passed through the gate. The east pasture, the cattle that were already looking stronger, the fence line that Hector had fixed on that front morning. "We should tell Hector tomorrow," she said. "And Pete. They should know what's happening. They have a right to know if there's trouble coming." "Agreed," William said. "And Ruby," she started. "Not yet," William said. "She worries. She already worries," Clara said gently. "She worries because she knows something is happening, and nobody's told her what it is. Children do better with managed truth than with unexplained tension." He looked at her sideways. She asked me yesterday if you were going to have to sell something, Clara said. I told her we were working on it. She said, is Clara helping? And I told her yes. She paused. She said, good. Clara fixes things. William looked back at the road. Something in his face did something that he didn't try to control or manage. And Clara looked away to give him the privacy of it. She understood the particular feeling of hearing your child trust someone. She understood it was a gift that didn't come twice. The wagon rolled toward the house. The lights were on. Hattie still up. Probably Ruby pretending to be asleep, but almost certainly watching out the window for their return. Thomas Blackwell was out there, somewhere in Silver Creek. And he was not done. Clara knew that. She also knew that she was not the woman he thought she was, any more than she'd ever been the woman the platform crowd thought she was. She was the woman who woke before sunrise and read midnight documents and rode 6 hours round trip to understand a legal notation in a dead man's cramped handwriting. She was the woman who had fixed things her entire life without credit. She was done doing it without credit, and she was just getting started. Blackwell's response came 4 days later, and it did not come in the form of a letter. It came in the form of a story. The kind of story that didn't need a signature or a return address because it traveled on its own from one conversation to the next, picking up details and losing accuracy with every telling. Until by the time it reached the far end of Silver Creek, it had become something unrecognizable from whatever it had started as. Clara heard the first version from Hattie, who had heard it at the dry goods store on a Thursday morning. She came back from town with the shopping, and her jaw set at an angle that Clara had learned meant something had happened that Hattie was working out how to say. Just tell me, Clara said. Hattie set the parcels down. Margaret Ellis is telling people that you forged a document. The kitchen went quiet. What kind of document? Clara asked. The water rights. She's saying you went to Millbridge and convinced some county official to create paperwork that doesn't actually exist. That you manipulated William into thinking the property has protections it doesn't have. Hattie paused. She's saying you did it to secure your position here. Because otherwise, William would have taken Blackwell's offer and you'd have been sent home. Clara stood very still for a moment. She thought about Aldous Finch in his office, carefully preparing certified copies of a document that had been sitting in that file for decades. She thought about the notation in James Carter's handwriting, cramped and precise, the kind of notation a man makes when he wants to remember something important. She thought about the oilcloth wrapper that had kept the original deed protected through years of neglect. Then she thought about Thomas Blackwell, sitting somewhere in Silver Creek, understanding that his plan had been disrupted and reaching for the only other weapon he had reliably used his entire life. Her reputation, or rather the reputation he intended to build for her, out of the raw material of everything she'd ever been dismissed for. Does William know? She asked. I came straight here, Hattie said. Good, Clara said. Don't say anything to Ruby. She went to find William. He was in the barn with Hector, going over the cattle numbers. And he looked up when she came in with the expression of a man who could read from the way a person walked that something had shifted. She told him plainly. No softening, no editorializing. Just the facts as Hattie had delivered them. When she finished, he was quiet for long enough that Hector, who had been standing very still, pretending to be invisible during the conversation, shifted his weight and looked at the ground. He's calling you a forger, William said. Yes. To protect himself from a legitimate legal document. Yes. Because if people doubt the document, they doubt you. And if they doubt, then anything we do with that water rights claim becomes questionable, she said. Which is what he wants. He can't challenge the document directly. It's legitimate. It's certified. And Finch is too careful and official to have made a mistake on something that's significant. So instead he challenges me. William's jaw was doing the thing it did when he was very angry and managing it very carefully. What do we do? Hector asked. Both of them looked at him. He had forgotten he was pretending to be invisible. "We keep working," Clara said. "We don't respond to rumors. We don't chase them down and argue with them. We do our work and we let the work speak." Hector nodded slowly. "And if the work doesn't speak fast enough, then we find another way," she said. She looked at William. "I need to write to Aldous Finch. I need a written statement from him confirming the document's authenticity and the date it was originally filed, which will be decades before I ever set foot in Montana." "I'll take the letter myself," William said immediately. "No," she said. "You need to be here, send Pete. He's reliable and he doesn't talk too much." She paused. "I also need you to think about who in Silver Creek Thomas Blackwell has not already bought or influenced. People who might be willing to speak to what they know about how the county records work." William thought about it. "Judge Calloway," he said. "He's been on the bench for 30 years. He and Blackwell have never been friendly. Would he talk to us?" "I think he'd be willing to listen," William said carefully. "Which, with Calloway, is the same thing." "All right," Clara said. "Get me a meeting with the judge." She turned to leave the barn. "Clara." William's voice stopped her at the door. She turned back. "He's doing this because we found something he didn't want us to find," William said. "He's doing this because you found something." "I know," she said. "He's coming at you specifically." "Not me, you." "Yes," she said. "Because he thinks I'm the easier target." She held his gaze steadily. "He's made that mistake before. So have a lot of people." She walked out of the barn and back toward the house. Behind her, she heard Hector say quietly to William, "She's not scared." And she heard William's response, just as quiet, "I know." That's what worries Blackwell. The story spread through Silver Creek the way bad stories always spread faster than good ones. Louder than the truth, landing hardest on the people who had already wanted to believe the worst. Clara felt it at the market on Friday. She felt it in the way conversations shifted when she approached. In the particular variety of polite coldness that small towns deploy when they've decided something about you but haven't completely committed to saying it to your face. Martin Webb at the general store was still civil. He gave her the good fabric again. But he was quieter than usual, and once, when she was reviewing her order at the counter, she caught him looking at her with the expressions of a man who wanted to ask a question and had decided it was safer not to. She didn't offer to answer the question he hadn't asked. She paid for her goods and she left. She ran into Margaret Ellis outside the post office. Margaret was with two other women, the kind of social arrangement that gave a person confidence they might not otherwise have standing alone. She looked at Clara with the satisfied expression of someone who has released a thing into the world and is watching it do its work. "Mrs. Carter," Margaret said. The use of the title was precise. A small reminder that Clara's position depended entirely on the marriage that hadn't actually happened yet, the wedding that had been delayed. Practically speaking, because there had been too much immediate work to address ceremonial matters. "Miss Ellis," Clara said. She kept walking. "I imagine Millbridge was interesting," Margaret said to her back. Loud enough for both companions and a passing stranger to hear. So many interesting things to find in county offices when you're motivated. Clara stopped. She turned around. She looked at Margaret Ellis, really looked at her. In the direct and steady way that she had stopped apologizing for years ago. The look that made people uncomfortable because it didn't contain the deference they expected. "Miss Ellis," she said evenly, "I've been in Silver Creek for just over a month. In that time, I've listened to your opinions about me from a distance and from close enough to hear every word." She paused. "I understand that you've decided who I am and what I'm capable of." "That's your right." Another pause, "But I want to be very clear about one thing. Whatever Thomas Blackwell has told you, or suggested to you, or implied to you about what I found in Millbridge, you should ask yourself why a man of his means and position is so concerned with the reputation of a mail-order bride from Illinois." Margaret's expression went through several things in rapid succession. Clara turned and walked away before it settled on any of them. Her heart was beating faster than she would have liked. She kept her pace steady. She did not look back. She had said what needed to be said. Whether it landed was out of her hands. But she had learned something important over 27 years of being underestimated. The truth didn't need to win every argument. It just needed to be said clearly enough that when everything else fell away, it was still standing. The meeting with Judge Calloway happened on a Monday. In his office at the edge of town, surrounded by 30 years of accumulated books and paper, and the particular atmosphere of a man who had sat in judgment of enough human behavior that very little surprised him anymore. He was in his late 60s, compact, with a white beard trimmed to the point of severity and eyes that had perfected the art of revealing nothing while taking in everything. He looked at Clara the way she imagined. He looked at every person who sat across from him with the patient, analytical attention of someone assembling a picture from evidence rather than impression. William had asked if she wanted him to come. She had said no. This was her conversation to have. She laid the certified copies of the water rights agreement on the desk in front of him. She explained, briefly and without dramatic embellishment, what they had found, how they had found it, and what had followed. Calloway read the documents without speaking. He read carefully. The way she read, looking for the specific things that mattered. When he finished, he folded his hands on the desk. "How long has Blackwell been suggesting that this document is fraudulent?" he asked. "Less than a week," she said. "And before that?" "He made an offer on our eastern quarter without disclosing this agreement existed," she said, which suggests he had prior knowledge of it. Calloway was quiet for a moment. "That would be a significant ethical violation," he said carefully. "Not necessarily a legal one, absent proof of intent." "I understand that," she said. "I'm not here to make a legal accusation. I'm here because William Carter respects your judgment, and I need to know whether this document will hold up to scrutiny if it's challenged." Calloway looked at her. "It will," he said flatly. "The Carter Water Rights Agreement is legitimate. Aldous Finch is an impeccable official. The document predates your arrival in Montana by over 20 years. He paused. "Anyone claiming otherwise is either uninformed or deliberately dishonest. And if someone were to challenge it formally," she said, "they would lose," he said, "expensively and publicly." The room was very still. "May I ask you something, Miss Whitman?" Calloway said. "Yes," she said. "Why did you come to this meeting alone?" "Carter Ranch is William Carter's property. This is his legal matter." She met his eyes. "Because Thomas Blackwell's attack is not on Carter Ranch," she said. "It's on me, on my credibility, on the idea that a woman without connections or beauty or social standing could find something that a wealthy and well-connected man didn't want found." She paused. "If William defends the document, it's a property dispute. If I defend myself, it becomes something else." Calloway's expression didn't change. But something behind his eyes did. "What does it become?" he said. "A question," she said, "about who in this county decides what's true. Whether it's the person who has the facts or the person who has the money to make people doubt the facts." The silence stretched. Calloway leaned back in his chair. He picked up the certified copies from his desk and looked at them once more. Then he set them down. "I will speak to 3 people," he said. "Men whose opinions carry weight in Silver Creek. I will tell them that I have personally reviewed this document and find it entirely authentic." He paused. "I won't speak to Blackwell directly. That's not my place. But I will make clear in the conversations I have that challenges to this document's validity are not founded in fact." Clara felt something release in her chest. Not relief exactly, it was too early for relief. More like the confirmation that the ground she was standing on was solid, which was different from knowing the road ahead would be easy. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," Calloway said. "I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it because I've watched Thomas Blackwell acquire land in this county for 2 years, using methods that have troubled me considerably. I don't have grounds to act on that trouble, but I have grounds to speak clearly about a legitimate document. And I will. She stood, they shook hands. At the door she paused. "Judge Calloway," she said. He looked at her. "The people on the platform when I arrived," she said. "Were you there?" He seemed surprised by the question. "No," he said, "I heard about it." "What did you hear?" He was quiet for a moment. "That William Carter had settled," he said. "That was the general consensus." She nodded slowly. "And now?" He looked at her with those assembled from evidence eyes. "Now I think," he said carefully, "that William Carter made the best decision he's made in years. Possibly the best decision anyone in Silver Creek has made in recent memory." He paused. "And I think Thomas Blackwell knows it, which is why he's frightened." She walked out of the judge's office into the Silver Creek morning. For the first time since Hattie had come home from the dry goods store with the story, she felt the weight across her shoulders shift, not disappear. Shift. There was still more to come. She knew that as certainly as she knew anything. But she was not carrying it alone. She came home to find Ruby waiting on the porch. Not in the arms crossed, chin lifted position of their first meeting. In the posture of a child who has been genuinely worried and has been trying not to show it. When she saw Clara coming down the road, she came off the porch steps at a half-run and then caught herself and slowed to a walk, which was in some ways more telling than running would have been. "You were gone a long time," Ruby said. "I had things to take care of," Clara said. "What things?" "Ranch business." She looked at Ruby's face and saw everything the child was not saying. "Come inside. I'll tell you what I can." They sat at the kitchen table, just the two of them. Hattie diplomatically absent, and Clara told Ruby a simplified version of what was happening. Not everything, but enough. The truth that Blackwell wanted their land and had tried to trick them. The fact that they had found a document that protected the ranch. The reality that Blackwell was trying to hurt Clara's reputation to undermine the discovery. Ruby listened without interrupting. She was a child who had learned that interrupting meant missing information. And she was constitutionally averse to missing information. When Clara finished, Ruby was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He's lying about you. He's encouraging other people to doubt me," Clara said carefully. "That's slightly different." "It's the same thing," Ruby said, with the moral clarity of an 8-year-old who had not yet learned to soften her judgments. "He knows the truth, and he's saying something different." "That's lying." Clara considered that. "You're right," she said. "What are you going to do?" "I already did some of it today," Clara said. "And there's more to do. But we're not in the wrong here. Ruby, we found a real document that protects your father's land. No amount of Thomas Blackwell's stories can change that." Ruby looked at her with those winter sky eyes. "Are you scared?" It was the same question Ruby had asked her father. Weeks ago, in a different form. Clara understood that Ruby had a particular need to know whether the adults around her were telling the truth about being okay. "A little," Clara said honestly. "Not of Blackwell. Of the way things get complicated when powerful people are cornered." She met Ruby's eyes. "But being scared of something doesn't mean you stop moving. It just means you're paying attention." Ruby was quiet for a moment. Then she slid off her chair, walked around the table, and hugged Clara around the middle with both arms quickly. Fiercely, the way children hug when they've decided something. Then she let go and stepped back, and her chin came up, and the arms crossed, and she was once again the composed, watchful child who revealed nothing for free. "I told Abigail Morrison that her father says you're very smart," Ruby announced, as if the hug had not happened. "Did you?" Clara said. She told her mother. Her mother told 2 other women. Ruby paused. "Mrs. Morrison says you explained something complicated to her husband that saved them money." "That's true," Clara said. "So people know," Ruby said. "They know you help people." The calculation behind this statement was extraordinarily clear. Ruby had been conducting her own small campaign in the schoolyard and around the kitchen tables of Silver Creek, using the resources available to an 8-year-old with sharp eyes and good information. Clara looked at this child who had decided, quietly and without announcement, to fight in her corner. Thank you, Ruby, she said. Ruby shrugged one shoulder. It's just the truth, she said. You always say the truth is useful. I do say that then. Ruby turned and walked toward the hallway, with the decisive stride of someone who had completed a task. At the door, she stopped. Papa came looking for you while you were gone. Twice, Clara absorbed this. He didn't say anything, Ruby added. He just looked. Then went back out. She paused significantly. He looked worried. She disappeared down the hall. Clara sat at the kitchen table alone for a moment, holding everything the day had given her. The judge's words. The certified copies in her bag. The story still spreading through Silver Creek like water finding its level. Ruby's fierce, brief hug. William going out to look for her and coming back without saying anything. She thought about the moment, on the wagon from Millbridge, when she had said, "I'm glad I'm here," and meant it in a way that surprised her. She thought about how much could change in the span of a month when you stopped waiting for permission to take up space. She heard the back door open, William's boots on the kitchen floor. He stopped when he saw her. "You're back," he said. "Just now," she said. He sat down across from her. He looked at her face in the thorough, careful way he had reading it, the way she read documents. Looking for the specific things that mattered. "How did it go?" he said. "Calloway will vouch for the document," she said. "He'll speak to people whose opinions carry weight. He won't confront Blackwell directly, but he'll make the truth visible to the right people." William let out a slow breath. "That's good, it's a start," she said. "And you," he said. "How are you?" She looked at him. He held the look without flinching. And she realized, not for the first time, but more clearly than before, that this was one of his particular qualities. He could hold a look without making it a contest. He simply looked steadily and waited. "I'm fine," she said. Then, because she had promised herself she was done performing fine when it wasn't accurate, "I'm angry." "Good," he said immediately. She blinked. "Angry is the right thing to be," he said. "He's attacking you because you found something that cost him. He's using every piece of armor this town had already built against you, the way they saw you at the station, the things they already believed, and he's sharpening it and pointing it back at you." His jaw was tight. "You have every right to be angry." She studied him. "You're angry too," she said. "Yes," he said. "I should have been the one to—" "Don't," she said firmly. He stopped. "This is not something you should have prevented," she said. "You can't control what Blackwell does. You can't control what the town thinks. And I will not have you carrying guilt for someone else's dishonesty." She looked at him steadily. "What you can do is what you've already been doing. Run this ranch. Show people the results of what we've built here together. Let the work be the answer." He was quiet for a long moment. "You and I are very similar," he said, "in ways I didn't expect. How so?" she said. "We've both been carrying things alone for so long that we don't know the first thing about letting someone help." He paused. "And we've both been doing it anyway, because it was the only option available. And we're too stubborn to quit." She almost smiled. "That's accurate," she said. "You're not alone in this," he said. "Whatever happens with Blackwell, whatever the town decides to believe." He held her gaze. "I want you to know that." The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the late afternoon light was changing the quality of everything. The way it did in Montana, abrupt and complete. The sky deciding something. "I know," she said. She said it without the usual armor she put around important things. Just the two words plainly. He nodded. He didn't try to make it into more than it was. That was the thing about William Carter, she thought. He never tried to make moments bigger than they were. He let them be exactly the size they were, and somehow that made them larger. 4 days later, Blackwell made his next move. It came through the bank. Seth Colby, the bank manager and Ellis's brother-in-law, sent a letter to Carter Ranch requesting a review of the outstanding loan on the ranch property, a standard operating note that William had taken out 3 years prior, entirely current in its payments. The letter cited a vague reference to changing risk assessments in the territory and requested that William come in to discuss the terms. Hector brought the letter in from the post and handed it to Clara, who happened to be in the yard when the post rider came by. She read it. She read it again. Her face was very still. She walked into the house. William was at the desk in the study, going over the cattle projections she'd prepared. She set the letter in front of him, without speaking. He read it. She watched the same stillness come over his face that had come over hers. "He can't call in the loan," he said. "It's current." "He's not calling it in," Clara said. "He's creating uncertainty. He wants you to come into that bank, and he wants Colby to mention casually that there are questions about the property's legal status, given the recent disputes." She paused. "And he wants you to walk out of that bank less sure of where you stand than when you walked in." William set the letter down. "If I don't go. If you don't go, it looks like avoidance," Clara said. "He's anticipated that. Then I go, we go," she said. He looked at her. "Colby is going to try to tell you that the water rights dispute creates uncertainty about the collateral value of the property," she said. "He's going to use language that sounds official and authoritative. I need to be there because I know which questions to ask that will make clear he has no legal ground for that position." William looked at her for a long moment. "You know what people will say," he said, "if you walk into that bank with me. A woman managing a man's business. People are already saying things about me," Clara said. "I stopped managing my behavior around other people's commentary a long time ago." She picked up the letter. "What time do you want to go?" He stood up from the desk. "Tomorrow morning," he said. "First thing that night." Clara sat at the kitchen table long after everyone else had gone to bed. She spread her papers in front of her, the certified copies from Millbridge, her notes from the meeting with Calloway, the original letter from Blackwell's initial offer, the banknote with its terms and payment history. She organized them in the order they would be most useful. She wrote down 6 questions she needed to be ready to ask Colby. She wrote down 4 statements she needed to be prepared to make if Colby tried to misrepresent the legal standing of the water rights document. She thought about the next morning. She thought about walking into that bank beside William, in a town that had laughed at her arrival, in a situation engineered by a man who had decided she was the weakest point in his opposition. She thought about her mother's voice. "Clara, some women are meant for certain things." She thought about the notation in James Carter's cramped handwriting at the bottom of a deed, about the oilcloth wrapper that had kept it safe for decades, about Aldous Finch preparing certified copies before she left his office, about Judge Calloway saying, with the flat certainty of 30 years on the bench, "Anyone claiming otherwise is either uninformed or deliberately dishonest." She thought about Ruby's fierce, brief hug, about William going out to look for her twice and coming back both times without being able to say what he needed to say. She stacked her papers neatly. She put them in her bag. She turned down the lamp. She went to bed. Tomorrow, Thomas Blackwell was going to discover exactly what kind of woman had come to Silver Creek on that train. Not the woman from the platform. Not the woman Margaret Ellis had decided she was. Not the woman a desperate cowboy had supposedly settled for. The woman who had been paying attention her entire life, filing everything away, waiting for a fight worth having. He had picked it. She was ready. Seth Colby was not a bad man in the way that Thomas Blackwell was a bad man. Blackwell was deliberate. He chose his targets, calculated his angles, and moved with the cold precision of someone who had decided long ago that the world was a transaction and every person in it was either an asset or an obstacle. Colby was something smaller and in some ways more common, a man who had spent his career making himself useful to powerful people and had confused that usefulness with integrity. He did what he was told because he had learned that doing what he was told kept his position safe. He didn't ask questions about the instructions he received because asking questions created friction, and friction made powerful people uncomfortable, and powerful people who were uncomfortable sometimes found new bank managers. Clara had met his type before. She had watched her father defer to men like Colby her entire childhood, watching opportunity walk past while her father smiled carefully and said nothing. She walked into that bank the following morning with her papers in her bag and Colby's letter in her hand, and William beside her. And she read Seth Colby's character, the first 30 seconds of meeting him, the quick assessment. When they walked through the door, the brief visible calculation when he registered Clara, the decision to address William directly and let her become furniture. She let him do it for now, Mr. Carter, Colby said, rising from behind his desk. Thank you for coming in. He extended his hand. William shook it. Colby's eyes moved to Clara in the brief, polite way that meant he intended to acknowledge her existence minimally and then proceed as if she weren't present. And this is Clara Whitman, William said. She manages the accounts and records for Carter Ranch. She's here because the concerns you've raised in your letter involve documentation she handles directly. Colby smiled. The smile was practiced warm enough to seem genuine, controlled enough not to commit to anything. Of course, he said. Please, sit down. They sat. Colby spent 4 minutes explaining the bank's position in language that was deliberately dense, the kind of language that was designed to sound authoritative to someone unfamiliar with it and to obscure to someone who was familiar with it exactly how little substance it contained. He spoke about risk assessments and territorial market shifts and collateral valuation reviews with the smooth fluency of a man reciting a script he had rehearsed. Clara let him finish. Then she said, Mr. Colby, the Carter Ranch operating note is current. Yes, he said. Of course. The payment history is unbroken for 3 years, she said. And the property value, if anything, has increased over the past 2 months as a result of improved cattle yield and operational efficiency. She opened her bag and placed the certified documents on his desk. The water rights agreement, which you'll find documented here in certified copy from the county recorder's office, establishes a legal protection on the ranch's primary water source that significantly stabilizes the property's long-term value. Colby looked at the documents without touching them. The bank's concern, he said carefully, relates to certain questions that have been raised in the community regarding the provenance of that particular document. What questions? Specifically, Clara said. He shifted slightly. There have been suggestions. From whom? She said. He blinked. I'm not at liberty. You're asking a client to discuss modifications to a current and performing loan based on community suggestions from sources you won't name, Clara said. Her voice was entirely even, not aggressive, not heated. Simply precise. The voice of someone who knew the exact shape of what was happening and intended to name it clearly. That's not a risk assessment, Mr. Colby. That's something else. The office was very quiet. William hadn't said anything since the introduction. He didn't need to. Clara could feel his attention beside her, fully present, watching Colby with the particular patience of a man who had decided to trust someone else's approach and was committed to that trust. Colby looked at the documents on his desk. He looked at Clara. He looked at William. Judge Calloway, William said quietly, has reviewed the water rights agreement and confirmed its authenticity. He mentioned it to Edgar Morrison and to Reverend Hawks at their weekly breakfast on Wednesday. He paused. I imagine that information has been moving through town since Thursday morning. Colby went slightly still. Clara watched him process this, the recalibration happening behind his careful face. The understanding that the ground he'd been seen standing on had shifted without his noticing. The judge's name in this context was not casual. Calloway had 30 years of unimpeachable reputation in Silver Creek. If Calloway had publicly confirmed the document, then whatever Blackwell had suggested to Colby was now directly in conflict with the most credible voice in the county. I see, Colby said. I want to be clear about something, Clara said. She picked up the certified copies and held them squarely. This document is authentic. The water rights it establishes are legally protected. The Carter Ranch loan is current, the collateral is sound, and there is no legitimate basis for a review of its terms. She set the papers back down. If the bank moves forward with a review under these circumstances, the grounds for that review will be examined, including who requested it and why. Colby looked at her for a long moment. She looked back. This was the moment she could feel it, where it went one way or another. Either Colby retreated into his position and forced them down the longer road, or he understood that the calculation had changed and adjusted accordingly. He picked up a pen. He made a notation on the paper in front of him. He set the pen down. "I think we can consider this matter resolved," he said. "The Carter account remains in good standing. No further review is necessary." He smiled the practiced smile again, but it was thinner now, the structure showing through. "Thank you both for coming in." They stood. At the door, Clara turned back. She had not planned to say anything further, but something in Colby's expression, the precise quality of a man who had been maneuvered into a corner and was already calculating how to explain it to someone, made her stop. "Mr. Colby," she said. He looked at her. "Thomas Blackwell is going to keep acquiring land in this territory," she said. "And he's going to keep using every tool available to him to do it, including this bank. That's not something I'm able to prevent." She paused. "But the men who help him will be standing in the path of something that eventually becomes a matter of public record. And when that happens, what they helped him do will be part of that record." She held his gaze. "I thought that was worth knowing." She walked out. William caught up to her on the street. He didn't say anything for half a block. Then he said very quietly, "You just warned him." "I did," she said. "Why?" She thought about it. "Because I don't think he's a bad man. I think he's a weak one, and weak men sometimes need to understand the size of what they're involved in before they'll find the courage to step out of it." She kept walking. "He might tell Blackwell everything I said. That's possible. But he might also think very carefully about the next request he gets." William walked beside her. "You're playing a longer game than I thought." "I'm playing the only game that works against someone like Blackwell," she said. "You can't beat him in a single confrontation. He has too many resources and too many people who owe him. You beat him by making his methods visible, by making the people around him uncomfortable enough that they start to hesitate." She paused. "Every person who hesitates is one less tool he has." William was quiet for a moment. "And Calloway and Morrison and Hawks. They're talking," she said, "which is what I needed them to do. Not because I told them to. Because the truth is a better story than Blackwell's version, and people generally prefer the better story once they hear it. Unless Blackwell gives them a reason to prefer his version," William said. "He will try," she said. "He's not." "No," William agreed. "He's not." They walked back toward where they'd left the wagon. The morning was moving toward midday, and Silver Creek was going about its business. Around them, people on errands. A delivery wagon on the main street, two women talking outside the millinery shop who glanced at Clara and then away with the carefully calibrated indifference of people pretending they hadn't been watching. She was not invisible here anymore. She wasn't sure yet whether that was better or more dangerous. But it was real, and she would take real over invisible every time. What happened next came from a direction Clara had not anticipated, which meant that, despite everything she thought she'd learned about Thomas Blackwell, she still had more to learn. She had expected him to come at the land again. She had expected him to try another angle on the water rights, or to find a different financial pressure point, or to escalate the rumors in some form that required another direct response. She had not expected him to come at Ruby. It happened through the school. Silver Creek Schoolhouse was run by a woman named Dorothea Pratt, who was young and earnest and fundamentally decent, but who was also employed by a school board that included, among its 4 members, a man whose wife was Margaret Ellis's closest friend. The following Tuesday, Ruby came home from school and went directly to the room she shared with the upstairs window, and she did not come down for dinner. Clara noticed immediately. She finished serving the meal, let William and Hector eat, and then excused herself and went upstairs. She knocked on Ruby's door. No answer, Ruby, she said. I'm not going away. Silence. Then the sound of movement. Then the door opened, and Ruby stood there with her chin at its highest and her eyes red at the edges. And Clara's heart did something quiet and fierce. Come in, Ruby said. She went in. She sat on the edge of Ruby's bed and Ruby sat beside her. And for a moment they just sat. Tell me, Clara said. Ruby's jaw worked. She was fighting the telling. The way she fought everything with all her considerable will and the particularly painful stubbornness of someone who had learned that needing things was a vulnerability. Dorothea said the school board is reviewing whether Papa is a suitable guardian, Ruby said. The words came out flat, controlled, wrong in the mouth of an 8-year-old. Because of the questions about you. Clara was very still. She said, she's not allowed to say who raised the concern, Ruby continued. But that there will be a review. That they need to make sure. She stopped. Her voice had cracked on the last word, and she was working very hard not to let it crack again. That they need to make sure what? Clara said quietly. That I'm in a stable environment, Ruby said. She said it the way she'd heard it, said in an adult's careful, official phrasing that didn't belong in a child's mouth at all. She said there are questions about whether the people in my household are of appropriate character. Clara understood in that moment what Blackwell had done. He had looked for the thing that couldn't be defended with documents or judges or legal arguments. The water rights were protected by county records. The bank was protected by law. But a child's welfare or the appearance of concern about a child's welfare could be raised by anyone at any time. And it didn't require evidence, it just required the suggestion. The implication. The question posed in the right official room. He had aimed at Ruby because Ruby was the one thing William Carter would dismantle everything to protect. Including, potentially, his relationship with Clara. She put her arm around Ruby, and Ruby leaned into it with the sudden, desperate completeness of a child who had been holding too much alone. Listen to me, Clara said. Are you listening? Ruby nodded against her shoulder. Your father is a good man. This is a good house. What has happened here in the past 2 months has made it better. Not worse. That is the truth. She kept her voice steady. There are people who want to use you to frighten your father into giving up something he shouldn't give up. That is a very ugly thing to do, and I am telling you right now it will not work. Ruby lifted her head. Her eyes were still red, but her face was resolving back into determination. What are you going to do? She asked. I'm going to talk to your father, Clara said. And then we're going to handle this the way we've handled everything else with the truth. Clearly stated, to the right people. Ruby was quiet for a moment. Then he's going to be angry. Yes, Clara said. He is. Papa doesn't get angry often, Ruby said. But when he does, she paused. Is that bad? Not always, Clara said. Sometimes it just means someone has finally pushed far enough. She went downstairs. William was alone in the kitchen. Hector had gone back out. William looked up when she came in, and he read her face the way he'd been learning to read it quickly. Thoroughly, looking for the specific things that mattered. She told him. She kept it brief and factual, because factual was what he needed right now. Not emotional scaffolding. When she finished, he was very still for long enough that the kitchen clock was audible. Then he said he went after Ruby. Yes, Clara said. Another silence. This one had a different quality than his usual ones. He raised a welfare concern about my daughter, William said. His voice was controlled in the particular way that meant control was costing something. To the school board. Through the school. That appears to be what happened, Clara said. He stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there with his back to her, and she could see the tension in his shoulders, not the fatigue tension of daily ranch work, but something sharper. I am going to go see Blackwell, he said. No, Clara said immediately. He turned around. His face was not angry exactly, it was past angry. In a place that was quieter and more deliberate and, in some ways, more alarming. Clara, if you go to Blackwell right now, you become the problem, she said firmly. You become an unstable man who confronted a respected citizen, which is exactly what he wants. He will have someone there to witness it. He has probably been waiting for you to react this way. She moved closer. William, listen to me. He looked at her. He's trying to take what matters most to you, she said. Your land, your daughter, your position in this community. He is doing it precisely because he believes you will react with your fists and your anger and make his job easier. She held his gaze. Don't give him that. The muscles in his jaw worked. Then what, he said. It came out rough and barely controlled. Then we go to the school board, she said. Tomorrow morning. Together. With documentation of the ranch's improvement. Testimony from Hector and Pete about the working conditions and stability of the household. And a character statement from Judge Calloway, if he'll give us one. She paused. We walk in there with facts, not fury. We let the board see who you are and who I am and what this household is. And we make it impossible for them to find what Blackwell wants them to find. William looked at her for a long moment. You've already thought about this, he said, not accusing. Just recognizing. I thought about what moves he had left, she said. I didn't expect this one specifically, but I prepared for the shape of it. She paused. I should have told you I was thinking about it. That was wrong. I'm sorry. He shook his head slowly. Don't apologize for thinking ahead. He sat back down. He put his hands flat on the table. Calloway will give us a statement. I believe so, she said. And the ranch numbers. I have them, she said. 6 weeks of documented improvement. Feed efficiency. Cattle weight gain, operating costs, revenue projections. All of it. She sat down across from him. This is not about whether we're good people. William, any fool can see we're good people. This is about whether we can make the board understand that in the time I've been here, Ruby's life has become more stable, not less. That's the specific claim we need to answer. He looked at her hands on the table. He reached out and placed his hand over them, not romantic, not careful, just direct, the gesture of a man who needed to say something he didn't yet have the words for. She didn't move her hands. You came here for a practical arrangement, he said. That's what I offered, a struggling ranch and a chance to build something. He paused. You didn't sign up for Thomas Blackwell. You didn't sign up for Margaret Ellis and Seth Colby and a school board review. You didn't sign up for any of this. No, she agreed. And you're still here. Yes, she said. Why, he said. Simple. Direct. No performance in it. She thought about how to answer that honestly. Because this is real, she said, what we're building here. The Ranch Ruby. Whatever this is between us, she paused. I spent 27 years living in a life that wasn't quite real, where I was useful but invisible, competent but unacknowledged. I was waiting for something to be real, and I didn't know it until I found it. She looked at him. I'm not going to walk away from something real because it's all so hard. His hand pressed over hers more firmly. She felt it move through her, not like anything she had experienced before. Not like the love she had read about in books or heard described in her sister's excited conversations. Something quieter and more permanent than that, something that had been built out of shared mornings and difficult conversations and $60 words and the knowledge that this man saw her clearly and was not frightened by what he saw. I need to tell you something, William said. All right, she said. When I wrote that letter, the one you answered, I wasn't hoping for anything specific. I told myself I just needed someone practical, someone capable. He paused. He looked at their hands on the table. I told myself I wasn't hoping for anything because I couldn't afford to hope for the right thing and get something less. Clara waited. And then you sat across from me in the kitchen and told me about the water in the same breath that you told me about your mother, he said. And I thought, he stopped, started again. I thought, this is a person, a real one, not someone performing capability. Someone who actually is. The kitchen clock measured the silence. I don't want a practical arrangement, he said. I haven't wanted just that for a long time. He looked at her directly. I want you to stay, not because the ranch needs you. Not because Ruby needs you. He stopped. The careful, managed man and the honest one were fighting each other, and she could see it. Because I need you. And I'm not used to saying that. She looked at him. She thought about 27 years of being told, in 100 different ways, that she was not the woman men needed. She thought about a train platform and a town's laughter and a worn bag she had carried herself. She thought about what it felt like to be seen. Ask me properly, she said quietly. Say it properly. He looked at her, his hands tightened over hers. Marry me, Clara, not for the ranch, not for Ruby. For me. He paused, because you are the most remarkable person I have ever met. And I have been a fool to let this long pass without saying so. She was quiet for exactly long enough for it to be real. Yes, she said. One word, the right one. They went to the school board the next morning. There were 4 members. 3 of them Clara had never spoken to directly. The 4th was a man named Gerald Pierce, whose wife Clara had helped organize a charitable collection 3 weeks prior, a small thing, forgotten quickly on Clara's side, but apparently not on Pierce's. Because when she walked in, he met her eyes with an expression of recognition and something close to apology. She organized her papers on the table before the meeting started. She did it calmly and methodically, though she did everything, and she was aware that the board members were watching her, watching the way she moved through the space, trying to reconcile whatever they'd been told with what they were seeing. Judge Calloway's written statement was the 3rd document in the stack. She had sent Hector to his house at first light that morning with a note explaining what had happened. And Calloway had responded within an hour with 3 handwritten paragraphs that were precise, unambiguous, and worth more than anything else in the stack. She let William speak first. He spoke about Ruby, about what the ranch had been before Clara arrived and what it had become. He didn't dramatize it. He just told the truth plainly, in the way of a man who had learned that plain truth was his most effective tool. When he finished, Clara placed the documentation on the table. She walked the board through 6 weeks of records. She spoke about Ruby, specifically about the child who had been watchful and isolated and was now, by increments, becoming something more open. She described, concretely and without sentiment, what stability looked like in a household and why Carter Ranch now had it. She placed Calloway's statement last. She let them read it. Gerald Pierce was the first one to look up. This review, he said carefully, was initiated based on concerns about the character of the household, specifically regarding documentation that Judge Calloway has now publicly confirmed as authentic. He looked at the other board members. I would suggest that the basis for the review no longer exists. One of the other members, an older man named Garrett, who had not made eye contact with Clara once during the meeting, said, there were also concerns about the general. What concerns? Specifically? Clara said. He looked at her. I would like to know, she said. The specific concerns about this household, not the general ones. The specific ones. Because I have documentation here that addresses the ranch, the finances, the daily operation, and the child's well-being. If there is a specific concern I have not addressed, I would like to address it. The man looked down at the table. He did not name a specific concern, because there was not one. There was only the shape of concern, manufactured and deployed without substance, hoping that the appearance of official scrutiny would be enough to do the damage that direct action could not. Pierce looked at his fellow board members. I move that this review be closed, he said, with a finding that the Carter household is stable and appropriate. The motion passed. 3-1. Garrett predictably did not vote with them. Clara gathered her papers. She put them back in her bag. She stood, and William stood beside her, and they thanked the board and walked out of the schoolhouse into the Montana morning. Hector was waiting outside with the wagon because Clara had asked him to come, and he looked at their faces when they came out, and something relaxed across his shoulders. All right, he said. All right, William said. Hector let out a breath. Good. He looked at Clara. Ruby's been in the yard since we left, helping Hattie with the beans, except she's not actually helping. She's just standing near the beans looking worried. Clara almost smiled. Let's get back, she said. Thomas Blackwell was at the ranch when they arrived. He was there in the same way he'd been there the first time unannounced, sitting on his horse just inside the gate, with the ease of a man who believed his presence entitled him to space that wasn't his. The difference was that this time, Clara saw him coming before he saw her watching. William's jaw went hard when he saw the horse. He pulled the wagon to a stop. Hector, behind them on his own horse, pulled up alongside. Blackwell rode forward to meet them. He looked, Clara thought, slightly less certain than usual. Not much, barely perceptible. But she had learned to read the small things, and the small thing she was reading was a man who had deployed 3 separate strategies in the span of 2 weeks and watched each of them fail, and who had come in person because he needed to assess the damage directly. William, he said. No pretense of friendliness this time. Thomas, William said. He stayed in the wagon seat. He did not make the gesture of getting down to meet him at eye level. Blackwell's eyes moved to Clara. They stayed there for a moment longer than they usually did. I think it's time we spoke plainly, Blackwell said. I've been waiting for that, William said. Blackwell looked at him. Then back at Clara. Then at Hector, who had positioned himself slightly behind and to the left of the wagon in the uncalculated way of a man who had simply stopped his horse there and happened to be waiting. The eastern quarter, Blackwell said. My original offer was fair. It was generous, William said. And it didn't account for the water rights. The water rights are a legal complexity that could be resolved.
They've been filed with the county,
William said. They're on record. They can't be resolved. Blackwell's expression shifted. The pleasantness was entirely gone now, replaced by something that was not quite anger. Thomas Blackwell. Clara suspected, rarely felt genuine anger, because genuine anger implied you hadn't anticipated something. And he was a man who considered himself beyond being surprised. What she was reading was colder than anger. You're making an enemy, Blackwell said. Quietly. Directed at William, but she felt it aimed at her. You came onto my land 3 times in 2 weeks and attacked my household by 3 different means, William said. His voice was completely level. I think the question of who made an enemy of whom has already been answered. Blackwell looked at Clara. She looked back. You think you've won something, he said to her. It was the first time he'd spoken to her directly in all their interactions. The first time he'd acknowledged that she's a participant in this, rather than a piece of it. I think, she said, that we've protected what belongs to us. That's not winning something. That's just not losing. He looked at her for a long moment. She could feel him recalculating, adding up the bank, the school board, the judge, the certified documents. The fact that she was sitting in that wagon seat without a single tremor of uncertainty in her posture and arriving at a sum that did not match the number he'd started with when he first saw her step off a train with. A worn bag and a plain face and no apparent allies. He had looked at her and seen nothing worth accounting for. He was accounting for her now. Good day, he said. He turned his horse and rode out through the gate. Nobody on the wagon spoke until he was out of sight. Then Hector said he'll be back. Maybe, Clara said. But he'll come back different. He knows we won't fold. That changes the calculation. William reached across and took her hand. Not hidden, not careful. Right there in the yard, in plain sight of Hector and the house, and whatever Montana sky was watching. She let him hold it. Let's go inside, he said. Yes, she said. Ruby was already at the steps when they reached the house she had been watching from the window. Clara, suspected, had seen Blackwell in the yard, had held herself very still with all her considerable will for the 10 minutes it took for the encounter to resolve. When she saw Clara climb down from the wagon, she didn't run. She walked. But she walked fast, and when she reached Clara, she took her hand, the same hand William had just released, and held it with both of hers, and looked up with those winter sky eyes and said, "Is it over?" Clara looked down at her. She thought about Thomas Blackwell riding away. She thought about what Hector had said, "He'll be back," and about what she herself had said in response, and about the truth, underneath both of those things, that men like Blackwell were not usually finished in a single season, that there would likely be more strategies and more maneuvering and more attempts to chip away at what she and William were building. But she also thought about 6 weeks of records that told a clear story, about a judge's 3 handwritten paragraphs, about Hector fixing the fence line on the morning she asked, about Martin Webb giving her the good fabric twice in a row, about the Morrison family's eldest son who came to work every morning with the particular diligence of someone who had decided the place he worked for was worth working for, about a man on a wagon seat holding her hand in plain sight, about a child holding it now with both of hers. Not entirely, Clara said honestly. But enough. Ruby considered that. She nodded once. The decisive nod of someone filing a piece of information in the correct category. Then she kept holding Clara's hand and walked with her up the porch steps and into the house. And in that moment, in the simple ordinary motion of a child choosing to hold your hand and walk beside you into a home that had become real, Clara felt something settle in her chest that had been unsettled for 27 years. Not relief, not triumph, something quieter than both of those. Something that felt, finally, like arriving. The wedding happened on a Saturday morning in early November, 6 weeks after Blackwell rode out of the Carter Gate for the last time that season. It was not a large ceremony. Clara had not wanted large. She had spent enough of her life being looked at by crowds who saw the wrong things, and she had no interest in turning the most important day of her life into another occasion for public assessment. Judge Calloway performed the ceremony. Hector stood beside William. Ruby stood beside Clara, wearing a blue dress that Hattie had spent 4 evenings altering to fit her properly, and she held herself with the precise dignity of someone who understood the significance of the occasion and intended to honor it. Aldous Finch came from Millbridge. He had not been invited. Exactly, Clara had written him a brief letter informing him of the date, and he had appeared that morning with a small, wrapped gift and the expression of a man who felt he had a stake in how this story ended. Martin Webb came. The Morrison family came. 2 other ranching families from the eastern edge of the territory came. Men who had heard, through the slow, reliable telegraph of community conversation, that Carter Ranch had stood its ground against Thomas Blackwell, and that the woman at the center of it was worth knowing. Margaret Ellis did not come. Clara had not expected her to. The ceremony itself was short. Calloway read the words that needed to be read, and William said what needed to be said, and Clara said what needed to be said. And when it was done, she was Clara Carter, and the name fit differently than any name she had ever worn before, not because it was a man's name, not because it meant belonging to something, but because she had earned the right to it through 6 weeks of the hardest and most honest work of her life. William kissed her once briefly, in the way of a man who understood that the important things didn't require performance. Ruby hugged them both at once, wrapping her arms around whatever she could reach, and then stepped back and straightened her blue dress and composed herself with enormous effort. Hector said, well, in the tone of a man who had many feelings and had organized them into one syllable. Aldous Finch shook William's hand and then turned to Clara and said, I want you to know that in 30 years of keeping county records, I have never been more pleased about the contents of a particular file. Clara looked at him. Thank you, Mr. Finch. No, he said. Thank you. She thought about that for a long time afterward. The celebration that followed was simple. Hattie had cooked, and there was enough food, and the people who had come ate together in the Carter house and talked and laughed. And Clara moved through it all with a feeling she kept returning to because she hadn't quite gotten to it yet. She felt welcome, not tolerated. not useful. Not the woman who had organized everything and would receive a brief acknowledgement before the conversation moved on. Welcome, in the way that meant people were genuinely glad she was in the room. The Morrison patriarch raised a glass and said, "To the woman who found the water." Everyone laughed. And Clara laughed too, because it was a good shorthand for a story that was more complicated than a single sentence, and also accurate in the way that good shorthand usually was. Hector stood in the corner watching everything with the proprietary satisfaction of a man who considered himself partially responsible for how it had turned out, which was not entirely inaccurate, and William stayed close. Not possessively, not in the way of a man marking territory. In the way of someone who had spent years practicing, not needing people, and had finally decided that the practice had cost him more than it had protected him. Twice that afternoon, when someone pulled Clara into a conversation and held her there, she looked up and found him watching her with an expression she had finally named. Somewhere in the past few weeks, it was the expression of a man who still couldn't quite believe his own luck. She understood it because she felt it herself. Thomas Blackwell did not give up in November. She had known he wouldn't. She had told Hector he would come back different. And he did, more careful, more patient, working through channels that were harder to trace and slower to respond to. In December, he filed a formal challenge to the water rights agreement with the county, arguing on technical grounds that the original notation was ambiguous and that the rights described were not as comprehensive as the certified copy suggested. Clara learned about the filing from Aldous Finch, who sent her a letter the same day it arrived at the county office. She read the letter at the kitchen table on a Thursday morning and then read it again. And then she called for William. He read it. He looked at her. "He found a lawyer," he said. "He found an expensive lawyer," she said. "The language in this filing is very sophisticated." She set the letter down. "He's not trying to win outright. He's trying to make this expensive enough and complicated enough that we run out of resources before he does." "Can he win?" William asked. "Not on the merit," she said. "The document is clear. But if this goes to a formal hearing, we need our own representation. And hearings take time and money, and while we're focused on the hearing," she paused. "We're not focused on the ranch," William finished. "Yes," she said. They sat with that for a moment. "How much time do we have?" he asked. "Finch says the hearing is scheduled for February," she said. "We have 8 weeks. And a lawyer will cost more than we have liquid," she said flatly. "Which is exactly what he's counting on." The kitchen was very quiet. Then William said, "Calloway." She looked at him. "Calloway knows every lawyer in this territory," he said. "And he has made it clear he has opinions about Blackwell's methods." He paused. "He can't represent us, he's a judge. But he might know someone who could." Clara looked at him steadily. "You'd ask him?" "He said to call on him if it was needed," William said. "It's needed." She thought about the February hearing. She thought about 8 weeks of ranch work alongside legal preparation. She thought about the systematic patience of a man who had been acquiring land for 2 years and had unlimited resources, and was now focused entirely on one small ranch and one woman he had decided was an acceptable casualty. She thought about every time in her life someone had decided she was an acceptable casualty. "Call on him," she said. William rode to Calloway's house that afternoon. He was back by dinner with the name of a lawyer in Billings, a man named Harlan Cross, who had spent 15 years in territorial law and who Calloway described as someone who did not lose cases he should win. The implication being that Calloway had already spoken to him. The implication being that Calloway had been waiting for this call and had prepared for it. Clara wrote to Harlan Cross that night. He replied within 4 days. His letter was 3 pages, dense and precise, and when she finished reading it, she felt for the first time since Finch's letter that the ground was solid again. Cross had found something. He had pulled the full record of Blackwell's land acquisitions in the territory over the preceding 2 years. He had found a pattern, not 1 acquisition, not 2, but 7 separate properties where the purchase had involved either a disputed document a pressured sale under financial duress, or a legal challenge to an existing rights agreement. In 3 of those cases, the sellers had later stated that they had felt coerced but had not known where to turn. 7 properties, 7 families, 7 versions of the same strategy. None of them, individually, rose to the level of provable fraud. But together, they told a story, and Harlan Cross intended to tell it. Clara brought the letter to William after Ruby was in bed. She sat across from him and watched him read it, and she watched him understand what it meant not just for Carter Ranch, but for the full picture of what Thomas Blackwell had been doing in the Montana Territory for 2 years. "He's been doing this everywhere," William said. "Yes," Clara said. "And nobody stopped him, because nobody had the full picture. Nobody had the full picture because he did it one piece at a time," she said. "One ranch, one family, isolated, spread out across the territory so the cases never landed in the same county at the same time." She paused. "Until now." William set the letter down. He looked at her. "You sent him looking," he said. "In your first letter, you told him about Blackwell's pattern of approach. The 3 strategies in 2 weeks. I described what happened and asked if there was context," she said. He found the context. William was quiet for a moment. "You were thinking about this weeks ago," he said. "When we were still dealing with the bank and the school board. You were already thinking about whether there was a larger pattern. I was thinking about it from the first time Blackwell came to the ranch," she said. "A man who drops by unannounced to propose a purchase he's clearly been planning for a long time doesn't usually have just one backup plan. He usually has a system." She looked at William steadily. "Systems leave records." He looked at her with that expression, the one that still appeared on his face sometimes when she said something that reminded him of the full distance between what he'd expected when he wrote that letter and what had actually arrived. "Harlan Cross is going to the February hearing," she said. "But he's also filing a consolidated complaint with the territorial court. Not just our case. All 7. William absorbed this. "That's large," she said. "Yes, it's large. And it will make Blackwell very angry and very dangerous for a period of time." She held his gaze. "I need you to know that before we commit to it. He will not take this quietly. He hasn't been quiet from the beginning," William said. "This is different," she said. "A territorial court filing is public. It names him specifically. It describes a pattern. His reputation, which is the foundation of everything he's built, takes a direct hit." She paused. "He will come back at us with everything he has." William looked at her for a long moment. "Are we strong enough?" he said. He asked it plainly. Without performance. Just the honest question. She thought about it honestly. "The ranch is stronger than it was," she said. "The finances are more stable. The cattle yield is up. The water situation is resolved." She paused. "And we have something he doesn't have." "What's that?" "People," she said. "The Morrison family. Hector and Pete. Finch, Calloway. The ranching families who came to the wedding. They all have reasons to want Blackwell's methods on the record." She looked at him. "He's been doing this for 2 years, and the people he's done it to have been isolated and alone." "We're not alone." William reached across the table. He put his hand over hers the way he had been doing for weeks now, not careful, not calculated, just present, right to Cross, he said. "Tell him to file everything." The February hearing was a cold morning. The kind of Montana cold that had weight and intention, and Clara had been awake since 4 o'clock preparing. She knew every document in their case. She had organized them in 3 separate ways: by date, by subject, and by legal relevance, so that whatever Harlan Cross needed, she could find it in under 30 seconds. She had written a 12-page summary of the ranch's operational improvement over 6 months, not because it was legally required, but because she intended the board to understand that Carter Ranch was not a struggling operation barely holding on. It was a functioning, improving enterprise that a man with unlimited resources had decided to dismantle for convenience. She intended them to understand the difference. The hearing was held in a public room at the county building. And it was more attended than these things usually were. Word had moved through the territory in the weeks since Cross filed the consolidated complaint quietly, through the networks of ranching families who talked to each other at markets and church and across fence lines, the slow spread of information that small communities ran on. She recognized several faces. The Morrison patriarch, two ranching families from the eastern edge who had come to the wedding, three men she didn't know personally, but who had the look of people who had traveled specifically to be present, and Thomas Blackwell, seated on the opposite side of the room, with a lawyer who had the expensive, practiced confidence of someone imported from somewhere larger than Montana. He looked at Clara when she walked in. She looked back. He had the expression of a man who had made peace with the idea that this particular engagement was going to be harder than he'd planned, but who had not made peace with the idea of losing. He was regrouping, recalculating, deciding what ground to concede in order to hold the ground that mattered. She had expected that. It was what she would have done. Harlan Cross was a lean man in his 50s, with the kind of face that gave nothing away voluntarily, and had clearly been that way since birth. He shook Clara's hand when she arrived and said, "Everything organized." And she handed him the binder she'd prepared and watched him flip through it and nod once, which she had learned in their correspondence was his version of enthusiasm. The hearing began. Blackwell's lawyer, a man named Aldrich, led with the technical argument about the water rights notation. He spoke for 20 minutes in the precise layered language of someone trying to make a simple thing complicated, introducing ambiguities that required knowledge of territorial law to evaluate, designed to leave the board uncertain enough that Blackwell's position could seem reasonable by comparison. Clara listened to every word. She made notes in the margins of her copy. When Cross rose, he did not address the water rights first. He addressed the pattern. He laid out the 7 cases methodically, not dramatically, not with the performance of a man trying to win a jury, but with the flat, undeniable clarity of someone presenting an arithmetic proof. 1 + 1 + 1, 7 times, equaling a conclusion that was not complex once you could see all the numbers simultaneously. The room was quiet in a way that was different from ordinary quiet. The quality of attention had changed, not the polite attention of people waiting for a meeting to end, but the charged stillness of people understanding something for the first time. Clara watched the faces of the men. She didn't know the ones who had traveled to be present. She watched them recognize their own stories in what Cross was describing. She saw one of them, a man in his 60s, broad-shouldered, with the kind of fatigue that came from carrying a heavy thing for a long time, press his mouth together and look at the table. She thought, he is one of the 7. She thought, he has been carrying this alone. Blackwell's lawyer objected twice. Cross addressed both objections with the measured patience of someone who had anticipated them, and the board noted the objections and continued. Then came the moment Clara had prepared for most carefully. Aldrich pivoted to her. He began a line of argument about the provenance of the original Carter water rights document, not the certified copies, but the original notation, the cramped handwriting, in the corner of the deed. He suggested that the notation itself might have been added at a date later than claimed, that the oilcloth preservation was suspicious, that the county's failure to independently register the agreement when it was made cast doubt on its validity. It was the same argument that had started as a rumor in Silver Creek 6 weeks ago. Now it was in a formal hearing, dressed in legal language, presented with careful precision, designed to achieve in an official setting what the town whispers had failed to achieve informally. Cross let him finish. Then he called Aldous Finch. Finch had come from Millbridge the night before. He was in the 3rd row, dressed in his most careful suit, with the expression of a man who had been waiting for exactly this opportunity and had prepared for it with everything 30 years of professional care could provide. He took his place. He answered Cross's questions with the precise, unhurried confidence of someone who knew his own expertise completely. He explained the county recording system. He explained the specific characteristics of historical Montana territory. Documents that distinguished original filings from subsequent additions. He described the physical examination he had personally conducted of the original deed, the ink oxidation, the paper composition, the fold patterns consistent with decades of sealed storage. He stated, without qualification, that the water rights notation had been made at the time of the original filing. He stated that the oilcloth preservation was consistent with James Carter's documented practice of protecting important papers, as evidenced by 3 other Carter documents in the county archive that showed identical storage methods. He stated that the document was authentic. He stated it the way a man states something he would stake his professional life on. Because he was, and he had, and he knew it. When Aldrich attempted to cross-examine him, Finch answered each question with the same measured precision and concluded every answer in the same place. The document is authentic. I am certain of this. There is no ambiguity. After 4 questions, Aldrich sat down. Blackwell's expression had not changed, but he had gone very still in the particular way of a man recalculating from a position he had not expected to be in. Cross presented the consolidated complaint. He walked through the 7 properties, the 7 families, the 7 versions of the same strategy. He was careful, scrupulously careful, to present only what the documents demonstrated, and nothing beyond them. He did not call Blackwell a criminal. He did not use the language of accusation. He simply laid the record in front of the board and let the arithmetic speak. The board recessed for 40 minutes. Clara sat beside William in the public room and did not speak because there was nothing to say that the waiting didn't already contain. She felt his shoulder against hers, solid, present. The warmth of someone who had decided that proximity was a form of language he was willing to use. Ruby was not there. She was at school, where she had been firmly and kindly told she needed to be, and where Clara suspected she was spending every recess interrogating the Morrison children for updates that hadn't happened yet. Hector was there, in the back row with Pete beside him. Neither of them had been asked to come. They had arrived that morning on their own horses before Clara and William left the ranch. And Hector had said, simply figured we'd come, and that had been the end of the discussion. She thought about a life that had people in it who arrived without being asked. She had not known how much she needed that until she had it. The board returned. The chairman, a gray-haired man named Alderman, who had said very little during the hearing, looked at his notes and then looked at the room. The Carter Water Rights Agreement, he said, is confirmed as valid and legally binding in its original and complete form. The challenge is dismissed, he paused. Additionally, the consolidated complaint filed by Cross regarding Mr. Blackwell's acquisition practices in the territory has been referred to the territorial court for formal review. This board has found sufficient grounds to merit that referral. Blackwell's lawyer leaned close and said something to him. Blackwell did not respond. He was looking at Clara across the room. She looked back. She did not feel triumph exactly. Triumph implied she had wanted to fight this fight. And she had never wanted it. She had wanted to build something. She had wanted to fix a struggling ranch and raise a watchful child and find out whether the quiet, careful man who wrote an honest letter could become someone she loved. What she felt was something cleaner than triumph, closer to justice. The satisfaction of a thing being measured accurately and found to be what she had always known it was. She looked back at Blackwell, and then she looked away, because he was no longer the most important thing in the room. William's hand found hers under the table. She held it. The territorial court review took 4 months. During those 4 months, Carter Ranch continued operating. The spring cattle yield was the best in 5 years. Hector hired a 4th hand, a young man who had heard about the ranch through the Morrison family and had come asking if there was work. There was work. Clara put him on the eastern pasture rotation and watched him figure out the system within a week with the satisfaction of someone who had designed the system to be learnable. She also taught Ruby to keep accounts. Not because Ruby had asked, Ruby had declared, one afternoon in March, that she wanted to know how Clara did the numbers. And Clara had put a ledger in front of her the following morning and spent an hour showing her. By the second week, Ruby was correcting her own addition errors before Clara pointed them out. By the fourth week, she was asking questions about the feed cost ratios that Hector could only partially answer. "She's going to be terrifying when she grows up," Hector said to Clara one morning, with the tone of someone who meant it as a compliment. "Yes," Clara agreed. "She is," she wrote to her mother once, in February. A brief letter. Not explaining herself, she was past the age of explaining herself to people who had already decided what she was. Just telling the facts. She was married. The ranch was growing. She was well. She was more than well. She did not invite a response. She simply wrote the facts and sent the letter, because she was not a woman who burned bridges. Even bridges she no longer intended to cross. Her mother wrote back 3 weeks later. The letter was short. It said, "I heard from the Greenleys that you've done well for yourself out there. I hope it's true." Clara read the letter once. She put it in her desk drawer. She went back to work. There was some version of peace available in that exchange, she decided. Not the peace of being understood. Not the peace of being apologized to. Just the small, sufficient peace of a woman who no longer needed a particular person's approval to feel certain of her own value. She had found her own ground. She was standing on it. That was enough. The territorial court issued its findings in June. Thomas Blackwell was found to have engaged in a systematic pattern of coercive acquisition practices in violation of territorial land statutes. 3 of the 7 cases were referred to criminal review. He was ordered to provide restitution to 2 of the affected families and to cease all acquisition activity pending further investigation. He was not destroyed. Men like Blackwell rarely were. Not all at once. But he was diminished. His credit at the bank tightened. His social position, built carefully over years, developed cracks that didn't fill in the way they had before. The men who had deferred to him for years began finding reasons to be busy when he called. Clara learned most of this through Calloway, who sent a brief letter with the facts laid out clearly and a single closing line. The record is corrected. She pinned that letter above her desk. It felt like the right place for it. On the evening the letter arrived, William found her sitting on the porch after Ruby had gone to bed. The June night warm and enormous around her, the Montana sky doing the thing it did in summer, going on so long and so clearly that you felt the smallness of yourself without it being frightening. Just true, he sat beside her. They sat in the quiet together. It was the comfortable quiet now, the kind that had enough history in it to hold its own weight. Not the careful quiet of 2 strangers managing the space between them. The quiet of 2 people who had said the important things and knew the important things and no longer needed the silence to be filled. Calloway's letter, he said. Yes, she said. It's over, he said. She thought about that word over. She thought about what it meant when you applied it to Thomas Blackwell. And what it meant when you applied it to everything that had come before Blackwell. All the years of being overlooked and underestimated and told, in ways large and small, that she was not quite enough. This part is over, she said. There will be other parts. There will be, he agreed. But we'll handle them. She looked at him. He said it with such complete certainty, not bravado. Not performance. Just the flat confidence of a man who has been tested and knows what he and the person beside him are capable of. She believed him. She believed him the way she had come to believe in the ranch, not because come told her to, not because she needed to, but because the evidence was clear, and she trusted her own ability to read evidence. Ruby wants to come to the next county meeting, she said. William looked at her. The county meeting. She heard us talking about the territorial court findings. She wants to understand how county governance works. Clara paused. She said, and I am quoting directly, if people like Blackwell can use official things to hurt people, then I need to understand how official things work. William was quiet for a moment. She's 8 years old, he said. She's 8 years old, And she's been watching us fight a legal battle for 6 months, Clara said. She's been watching, and she's been learning, and she has decided that the lesson is, understand the systems. She paused. She's not wrong. He let out a slow breath that contained something between exasperation and fierce, helpless pride. She's going to change this territory when she grows up. I expect so, Clara said. She'll need to know how to read a ledger to do it. She's getting there. He turned to look at her fully. In the low evening light, she could see his face clearly, the lines that the years had put there. The gray at his temples, the particular quality of a face that had been through enough that it had stopped pretending. I think about that day at the station sometimes, he said. I know, she said. She could tell when he was thinking about it. There was a specific quality to his silence on those occasions. I stood there and I heard what they said, he continued. And I wanted to say something, but I didn't know what to say. Because I didn't know you yet. I couldn't defend you specifically. I could only say she's not what you think she is. And I didn't have the words yet for what you actually were. What would you say now? She asked. He was quiet for a moment. Not because he didn't have an answer, she knew, but because he wanted the answer to be accurate. That was what she loved most about him. He cared about accuracy. I would say, he said slowly, that the woman standing in front of you just protected a ranch, won a legal battle against a man with 10 times her resources, taught my daughter to keep accounts, made Hector feel like the work he does matters, convinced a county judge to stake his reputation on a document, and changed the trajectory of 7 families' lives. He paused. And that she did all of it because it was the right thing to do. Not because she wanted recognition. Not because she was trying to prove something. Just because she saw what needed doing and she did it. He looked at her. That's what I would say, he said. Clara held his gaze. She thought about the worn bag she had carried herself. About the train platform and the laughter and the decision she had made in that moment not to fold. About the midnight documents and the Millbridge Road and the school board room and Blackwell's face when he finally looked at her and saw someone he hadn't accounted for. About a small girl holding her hand and walking into a house that had become home. About this man sitting beside her in the June dark who had written an honest letter into the world and trusted that someone worth trusting would answer it. She had answered it. He had been right to trust her. She had been right to come. They called me the ugliest mail-order bride that ever came west, she said. Not bitterly, just as a fact stated plainly. They did, he said. And now? He took her hand. He held it the way he always did, directly. Without calculation, the way a man holds something he knows is valuable. Now, he said, they call you Mrs. Carter, and they say it with their hats in their hands. The June night stretched out around them, wide and permanent and full of everything that came next, and Clara Carter, who had once been the woman nobody wanted and had become the woman nobody forgot, looked at the life she had built with her own 2 hands and found it exactly what she had always been capable of making. More than enough. Exactly right and entirely irrevocably hers.